Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something that sounds like it should be sweet, fluffy and full of candlelight dinners, but isn't. In fact, it might just get you poisoned, exiled, dismembered, or married off for the low price of 2 donkeys and a tax break. Yes, love. Tonight's story is all about how, for most of human history, love wasn't just risky. It was genuinely more dangerous than war. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your city, and what time it is where you are right now. Are you in bed? On a couch? Avoiding sleep for no good reason? I'd love to know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the marble shadows of ancient Rome, maybe in the Forum, maybe in a quieter alley where the politics hush and the perfume gets stronger. Rome is power, politics, wine, and death, often in close proximity. And you? You're not a senator, not a general. You're just someone who, unfortunately, has fallen in love with the wrong person. That person is Julia, or Marcus, or Claudius's daughter. It doesn't matter. The key problem here is that they're tied by blood to someone very important, and you, well, you're not. You're sweet, probably attractive in a weathered sandal kind of way, but you're also politically inconvenient. And in Rome, love isn't private. It's a public performance laced with expectation, legacy, and above all, control. Marriage in ancient Rome is less about moonlit sonnets and more about strategic alliances. Families marry not for love but for status, ties to powerful houses, military alignments, access to land. If you decide to follow your heart, you're threatening a structure that keeps entire factions in power. That's not romance, that's treason. One wrong word in a love letter, one late-night rendezvous witnessed by the wrong slave, and it's over. Literally. You might be tried for corruption, for immorality. Or maybe no one bothers with trials. Maybe someone just slips something into your wine at the next banquet. Hemlock goes down bitter, by the way, and if you're the object of affection and someone beneath your rank has the audacity to chase you, good luck to them. A jilted aristocrat doesn't cry into their toga, they plot. Exile is the best case scenario for a suitor who offends. Worst case, your beloved is married off while you're watching from a cell window, if you're lucky enough to still have a head. There's a particularly spicy story from the reign of Augustus, emperor and pioneer of using morality as statecraft. His daughter Julia was, let's say, fond of men. Multiple men. At once. Augustus wasn't amused. He exiled her to a rocky island, forbade alcohol and reportedly refused to see her again. A father's heartbreak? Possibly. A ruler's rage? Definitely. Love had embarrassed him, and in politics, embarrassment is blood in the water. Here's a curious detail. Roman laws actually had categories of adultery that were more concerned with class than consent. A woman caught with a slave could get her entire household punished. A man? Well, if he dallied with a slave, that was different. Love, like everything else in Rome, had double standards so wide you could ride a chariot through them. Historians still debate how common, genuine, romantic love was in Roman society, whether people really felt it the way we do today, or whether the entire idea is a later cultural invention. Some argue that love poems from people like Catullus show a deep emotional spectrum. Others suggest that these were more literary exercises than real expressions of feeling, like the Instagram captions of 40 BC. Quirky twist. Some Roman women, if they fell in love with someone unacceptable, would sometimes feign religious devotion, literally join temples to avoid marriage or escape controlling families. It didn't always work. But for a few, Venus offered sanctuary in a society where real love was treated like an infection. So here you are, in this world of marble and menace, trying to send a wax tablet to your sweetheart without being caught. Maybe you bribe a servant. Maybe you sneak past a sleeping guard. And for what? A note that might say, "I miss you, let's meet." Romantic? Definitely. Suicidal? Almost certainly. In modern terms, it's like dating your boss's daughter while working for the mafia. Except instead of getting fired, you might be publicly denounced, fined, or forced to join a military campaign in Gaul for 6 years. Not ideal. The irony is that Rome celebrated love in theory. Mythology was full of gods who fell head over heels. Venus, goddess of love herself, was everywhere in art. But mortal love? That was a different beast entirely. Love, real love, was dangerous because it couldn't be controlled, and in a place built on control, that was its own kind of rebellion. Imagine trying to kiss someone and having to calculate whether that kiss might cost you your home, your name, or your life. That was real, and that was Rome, a place where love wasn't a comfort after war. It was its own battlefield, and it was often bloodier. You're somewhere colder now, your breath visible in the air, the fire in the longhouse crackling as shadows dance across timber walls. Outside, the fjords stretch out like frozen veins beneath a steel sky. You're in Viking territory, and tonight, love isn't about candlelit courtship, it's about conquest. You're not writing poetry, you're preparing a raid. Let's say you're a young Norse warrior. You've proven yourself in battle, your axe still red with last week's glory, and now your heart's decided to do something even riskier than plundering a monastery. It's fallen for a girl in a rival village. Problem is, this isn't a rom-com. It's a raid in the snow kind of story, and romance is less about roses and more about ransoms. In Viking culture, marriage wasn't a light affair. Sure, there were weddings and celebrations, but behind every union was a cold transaction. Cattle, land, social leverage. The bride was less of a participant and more of a human treaty. And if negotiations didn't go well, that's where bride kidnapping came into play. It sounds dramatic, because it is. The custom, not unique to the Norse but famously practiced by them, was called marriage by capture. You and your crew might sail across a frozen bay, sneak through the woods, storm a hall at night, and literally carry her away. Was she interested in you? Irrelevant. You wanted her. Her family had something you needed. Her father wouldn't bargain. So now it's war, disguised as romance. Here's the tricky part. Sometimes the woman was actually into it. Sometimes she wasn't. There are sagas where fierce women fought back with swords or curses, and there are others where the abduction was part of a prearranged plot. She helped plan her own kidnapping to get away from a father who saw her as a pawn. Historically, scholars are still split on whether these bride raids were always violent, or more often strategic theatrics. The line between a planned elopement and a violent kidnapping in the sagas is foggy, complicated, and probably somewhere in the middle. But one thing is clear. Love here was often indistinguishable from war. Take the story of Halgadur from Njál's saga, a woman described as stunning and strong-willed. She marries multiple men, each one a little more ambitious than the last. The problem? Every time she exercises her will, people die. Whole feuds erupt. One man slaps her, and later ends up mysteriously dead. Coincidence? Not likely. Love with Halgadur is like hugging a bear that's also on fire. Beautiful, but guaranteed to end in blood. And let's talk about those feuds. When you love someone across clan lines in Viking society, you're not just taking a romantic risk, you're lighting a fuse. One marriage gone wrong could spiral into generations of revenge. It wasn't just meet the parents, it was meet the extended family of berserkers who are honour bound to avenge her if you screw this up. The thing is, Vikings didn't separate love from violence the way we try to now. The two were often braided together like the ropes on their ships. You couldn't fall in love without calculating the political cost. You couldn't choose a partner without thinking of how many enemies you'd make by doing so. And women? They weren't passive. Viking women could own land, divorce husbands, and in rare cases even fight. But they were also leverage in the great game of legacy and power. There's even archaeological evidence of couples buried together, some in grand ships, others in humble graves. Sometimes they're curled side by side, hands nearly touching across centuries. Romantic, definitely. But one particular burial raised eyebrows. A high-status woman buried with weapons and a man of lower status. Was she the warrior? Was he the praise? Was this a love story or a capture gone wrong? The scholars are still arguing, probably will be for decades. A quirky detail: some Viking women carried love charms made from carved bones or iron, little talismans they believed would help them attract or bind a lover. Some were sewn into clothing, others tucked beneath bedding. But just as often, magic like this could turn sour. A love charm gone wrong might bring madness instead of affection. Romance wasn't a safe emotion, it was a force to be controlled, if not feared. And don't forget the role of the skalds, the Viking poets. They didn't just write odes to battles, they wrote love poetry, dripping with metaphors of fire and ice and longing. Some poems were so intense they were said to cast spells on the listener. One skald was reportedly outlawed just for composing verses about a woman already promised to someone else. His words were too seductive, too dangerous. A poem could get you banished. So picture yourself again. You're standing on the shore, the wind biting through your cloak. You've just risked everything to steal away with someone whose hair still smells like the ashes of her village hearth. You look into her eyes. Maybe she loves you. Maybe she'll stab you the moment you sleep. That's love here. Cold, wild, and weaponized. In the Norse world, war was a man's duty. But love was where people gambled their lives voluntarily. It's one thing to die for your king. It's another thing entirely to die for a kiss that felt like a spark in the dark. But many did, and some, against all odds, actually lived to tell the tale. Now let's pull you out of the icy grip of the north and into something warmer, velvet-lined, and absolutely crawling with gossip. Welcome to the royal courts of medieval Europe. You're not holding an axe anymore. You're holding a goblet of wine, wearing something that took 6 servants to button up, and trying very, very hard not to fall in love with the wrong person. Again. Because here, in the soft candlelight and behind every jewelled curtain, romance isn't just risky, it's political dynamite with a smile. You're at court, maybe in France or England, maybe some tiny principality that's technically independent but always grovelling for favours. The halls are echoing with laughter, whispers, and the kind of secrets that get people quietly poisoned or publicly disemboweled. You've locked eyes with someone across the feast table, elegant, smirking, and extremely off-limits. Maybe they're married, maybe they're promised, maybe they're just too closely linked to a family your house has a feud with. None of it matters to your heart. All of it matters to your neck. Because in these glittering courts, romance is a dangerous sport. Courting someone isn't just about affection. It's a political act. Every flirtation, every bouquet of stolen roses, every glance too long by the tapestries, it all carries weight. And if you don't know the game, you won't just be rejected. You might be accused of plotting a coup. Seriously. Falling in love with a king's mistress could get you sent to the dungeon. Falling in love with a king's brother's mistress could get your entire family implicated in treason. Why? Because proximity equals power, and power attracts spies, rivals, and sudden, very permanent accidents. Love in a court setting meant you were navigating a labyrinth where the cheese is laced with arsenic. One of the best and most perilous examples of this was Anne Boleyn. You're probably thinking, oh, her again. But let's be honest, Anne didn't just break up a marriage. She practically broke the country in half. When Henry VIII became obsessed with her, it wasn't just about lust. It was a shift in alliances, a religious schism, and a political earthquake. People lost titles, fortunes, and heads just for picking the wrong side in that royal love triangle. Anne, clever and ambitious, used courtly love as a weapon. She held off the king for years, not exactly a safe strategy, but a brilliant one, and it elevated her family. Until, of course, she was accused of adultery, incest and treason, and was executed in 1536. So, mixed results. Here's a fun fringe detail. The tradition of courtly love wasn't just about affairs, it was a full-blown social performance. Knights would pledge loyalty to noblewomen in dramatic, poetic, totally impractical ways. They'd do quests in their name, fight duels, compose terrible verses. The point wasn't necessarily to sleep with them, it was to raise your own prestige. It was romance as resume building. Look how noble and devoted I am. Can I have a better job now? Except, of course, sometimes those feelings got real, and when they did, it usually ended in scandal. One knight might catch another sneaking into Lady Eleanor's chambers and boom, there's a duel scheduled at dawn, or a poisoning at dinner, or worse, a whisper in the king's ear that someone's plotting with foreign powers, all because 2 people made eyes at each other during a lute solo. There's a case in the Burgundian court where a noblewoman, Margaret of Bavaria, was accused of orchestrating a secret affair with a lower-ranked noble. The love letters were intercepted. Her lover was arrested. She was confined to her chambers indefinitely. Some say she died of heartbreak. Others say she died of poison disguised as medicine. Historians, still arguing, the one thing they agree on, that her feelings were fatal. Even being married didn't protect you. In fact, it often made things worse. Royal and noble marriages were rarely about affection. They were contracts between families, nations, even rival religions. If you were caught actually loving someone other than your spouse, the fallout wasn't just personal. it was diplomatic. A scandalous affair could trigger wars, cancel treaties, and cost your entire bloodline its lands. That's why courtiers became experts in coded language. Lovers used fans, handkerchiefs, even fruit to communicate. A dropped glove might mean, "meet me at midnight." A sliced pear on a plate might mean, "I still love you, but someone's watching." It was romantic in a spy thriller kind of way. But one wrong signal, one jealous rival, and the coded message could be the evidence that killed you. And the worst part? Sometimes the monarch themselves would use romance as bait. Kings and queens might encourage relationships, only to later expose them and punish everyone involved. Why? To consolidate power, to punish ambition, to remind everyone that in the court nothing happened without the ruler's permission. Here's a delicious little fringe example. At the court of Louis XIV, the King of France, it was fashionable for women to have official lovers, gallants. Louis didn't mind, as long as those affairs didn't threaten him. But when his own mistress, Madame de Montespan, got too powerful and too deeply involved in occult rumours and rivalries, she was pushed out. Love, no matter how gilded, had limits, especially when the throne was involved. You're walking down a marble hallway now, your breath catching because you hear a voice, their voice, echoing from behind a closed door. You know you shouldn't stop. You know you shouldn't care, but your heart's already 5 steps ahead. This is what love does in places like this. It lures you in, whispers sweet nothings, and then slams the iron gates behind you. In the royal courts, love isn't just a weakness, it's a weapon. Use it right, and you might rise above your station. Use it wrong, and you'll disappear into a silent corridor, your name never spoken again. You're not in a palace tonight, not on a battlefield either. You're somewhere darker, a stone cottage maybe, nestled deep in the forest where the moss climbs high on the walls and the air smells like smoke, herbs, and secrets. There's a heavy wooden table in front of you, covered in jars and bundles of dried plants tied with twine. The woman standing over them looks like someone's grandmother, if that grandmother also knew which mushrooms killed people slowly and which ones made them fall in love, or think they were in love, which historically is sometimes worse. Welcome to the world of love potions and witch hunts, where longing was a liability, and any woman who understood plants too well might end up on fire. Let's set the scene. You're a lovelorn villager in, say, 16th century Germany. The person you want doesn't even know you exist. Or worse, they do, and they've chosen someone with a cow and 5 more acres. So naturally you find yourself walking down a winding dirt path to visit the wise woman. You ask her for help. She gives you a small satchel of something that smells sweet and bitter at the same time. Tells you to sprinkle it into their wine. No big deal. Until it is. Because if someone finds that sachet, if the village priest hears even a whisper of your visit, you're both in serious trouble. Love, after all, is not supposed to be manipulated, and a potion, that's not just a shortcut. That's sorcery. It's easy to laugh at this now, love spells, powders, muttered charms under the moonlight. But back then, these were deadly serious. The line between folk remedy and black magic was paper thin, and often decided by how well liked you were, or how suspicious your neighbours were feeling that week. One historical case that really captures this mess is the affair of Catherine de Shays, better known as La Voisin, in 17th century France. She sold love potions and charms to aristocrats, including, allegedly, the mistress of King Louis XIV, and was implicated in a full-blown occult scandal. People were poisoned, babies were sacrificed, maybe, and entire noble houses went down in flames. La Voisin burned alive in 1680. Her crime, selling things that helped people fall or fake love. And here's the eerie twist. Many of those potions did something. Some included hallucinogenic herbs like belladonna or mandrake, both of which can cause euphoria, confusion, and in high doses, death. So, your magic tea might make someone more affectionate or knock them out cold. Romantic, right? In some regions, particularly in Italy and parts of Eastern Europe, love charms were passed down through families. Women taught their daughters which plants to use and which words to whisper. But if a man died unexpectedly, or worse, lived, and then rejected the woman, the whole practice could be turned against her. She wasn't a healer anymore, she was a witch. And once you were called a witch, the facts stopped mattering. Did you actually sell someone a potion? Did you just give someone a sprig of lavender to calm their nerves? Doesn't matter. The accusation was enough. Courts didn't need evidence. They needed confession. And if you didn't confess, well, they had ways of changing your mind. Hot, painful ways. It's tempting to think this was all about misogyny. And okay, yes, a solid 85% of it was. But men weren't immune either. In some towns, male cunning folk were targeted too, especially if they were helping women find love or cheat fate. One love charm gone wrong, one lover too enthusiastic, and suddenly you're being drowned in the river to see if you float. A fascinating debate among historians revolves around how much of this was sincere belief versus social scapegoating. Did people really think love potions could bend the will? Or were they just trying to justify the unpredictable nature of affection? Because let's face it, people fall in and out of love for weird reasons. Maybe it's easier to believe a spell was cast than to admit someone changed their mind. But for many, belief was real and terrifying. If your neighbour's sheep died and you'd recently asked their daughter to dance, congratulations, you're now a suspect in both witchcraft and emotional manipulation. And if you'd been caught buying a charm, good luck explaining that to the Inquisitor. Let's not forget the Church's role in this either. Clergy railed against these carnal deceptions from the pulpit. They saw romantic magic as a gateway sin, lust leading to pride, leading to damnation. So love, already unpredictable and inconvenient, became a fast-track ticket to hell if you involved herbs or hope. The irony, people still kept doing it, in secret, under beds, between pages of prayer books. Love is relentless like that. And here's a fringe fact to stir the cauldron. Some spells used menstrual blood as an ingredient. Yeah, that happened. The idea was that it bound the lover to the spellcaster physically and emotionally. Medieval grimoires even contain instructions for drying it, mixing it with wine or bread, and feeding it to the unsuspecting target. It's the kind of history that makes you want to check your dinner before you eat it. So here you are, holding a tiny bundle of herbs in a world where love can lead to execution. Maybe you tuck it away, maybe you use it, maybe it works. But now you've created a ripple, one that could bring joy, or suspicion, or something much, much worse. In a world ruled by superstition, scarcity, and power imbalance, love wasn't a sanctuary, it was a game of shadows, and even the smallest gesture, like a charm sewn into a hem, could pull you into a nightmare you'd never escape, all for a heart that might never be yours. Tonight, you're standing on a windswept border, somewhere between two kingdoms that have never liked each other. Think towering stone walls, a moat that smells like cold mud and regret, and a banner that flaps violently in the wind, reminding everyone exactly who's supposed to hate whom. But here you are, traitor to your bloodline and maybe your country, standing too close to someone whose last name is basically a declaration of war. Yeah, you're in love with the enemy. Bad move. Throughout history, falling in love with someone across political, national or cultural lines wasn't just frowned upon. It was seen as betrayal. Pure and simple. Think Montagues and Capulets, but with more armour and actual armies. This isn't just a romance. It's the opening act of a possible military conflict. And somehow, you're starring in it. Let's rewind to the 100 Years' War between England and France. It's the 1300s. You've got nobles on both sides marrying off daughters and sons like chess pieces, trying to secure alliances, forge peace, or at least stall the next bloodbath. But when two people, real people, fell in love across those lines, things got complicated. Take the infamous case of Joan of Kent. She married for love, secretly, and it caused a political scandal so severe it had to be annulled, until the annulment itself sparked an even bigger one. Her life turned into a royal tug-of-war between her heart and her dynasty. Then there's the big one, Cleopatra and Mark Antony. She's the Queen of Egypt. He's the Roman general with a sword collection and a thing for danger. When they fall for each other, it's electric, also fatal. The Roman Senate sees their affair not as a romance but as a threat. Suddenly, love becomes the excuse for war. Cleopatra's mere presence in Mark Antony's life turns him into an enemy of the state. They lose the war. They die. Rome absorbs Egypt. Love, once again, is swallowed by empire. Historians still debate whether their romance was strategic, sincere, or both. Was Cleopatra using Antony to secure her reign? Was Antony blinded by lust and politics? Or was it genuine affection caught in the gears of two colliding worlds? Depends who you ask. Either way, thousands died because two people couldn't, or wouldn't, stop loving each other. Now picture the Cold War. Fast forward a millennium. You're in Berlin, right before the wall goes up, and you've just fallen for someone on the other side. You meet at a bookstore. You talk about band music, jazz, politics. Carefully, you laugh, you kiss. And then the border closes, literally overnight. What now? You can't call them, can't write. If you try to visit, you're watched, interrogated, suspected of espionage. It's not dramatic romance anymore. It's surveillance, suspicion and separation. Love across borders hasn't gotten any easier. It's just traded swords for red tape. One fringe example comes from the Ottoman Empire. Christian slaves were sometimes taken into the palace, converted, trained and in rare cases rose through the ranks. Occasionally they fell in love with Muslim elites or even sultans. Roxlana, for instance, was a Ukrainian Christian enslaved and brought into Suleiman the Magnificent's harem. He fell for her so deeply he broke centuries of tradition, married her, and gave her unprecedented power. Some called it love, others called it dangerous. Court rivals saw it as a betrayal of imperial order. Even now, scholars argue over whether Roxolana truly loved Suleiman or masterfully manipulated him into rewriting history. And it's not always royals and spies. Sometimes it's two ordinary people, a merchant and a traveller, a prisoner and a guard, who dare to love across battle lines. In World War I, there are recorded instances of German and British soldiers who quietly exchanged gifts during unofficial ceasefires. Letters were sometimes smuggled, though most were destroyed to protect both sender and recipient. No statues, no parades, just human hearts beating behind enemy uniforms. But the stakes? Oh, the stakes were massive. Imagine your family finding out. Imagine your commanding officer discovering the letters. You'd be court-martialed at best, executed at worst. All for something that didn't benefit the state, didn't obey the rules, didn't make any strategic sense. Because love, real, raw, inconvenient love, doesn't care about strategy. It's the glitch in the system, the thing you can't predict or control. And in the past, when systems were built like fortresses, love was the one crack that could bring them down. So of course they treated it like a threat. A strange, sweet historical footnote. In the 18th century Japan, a samurai fell in love with a foreign trader's daughter. Unheard of, illegal, scandalous. He built her a tiny tea house in the woods where they met in secret. Years later it was discovered, empty but intact, with her name carved into the beams. No one knows what happened to them, but the tea house still stands. So you're back on that wind-battered border. Your family's telling you to marry someone else. Your country is drafting laws to keep people like you apart. The person you love, they're looking back at you with that same exhausted, defiant glint, and you have to decide, betray your blood or betray your heart. Either way, someone loses. That's why love was so dangerous. Not because it was weak, but because it was stronger than fear, stronger than war, and too unpredictable to ever be safe. History shows us this again and again. Swords draw lines, but love crosses them. And when it does, everything burns. The sun hasn't even risen, and you're already standing in a dewy field, heart pounding, breath ghosting in the cool air. A row of trees lines the horizon, quiet and unimpressed by your current predicament. Across from you, a man is checking the priming on his flintlock pistol. He's not a soldier, he's not a thief, he's your rival in love, and one of you is about to die because someone couldn't handle rejection. Welcome to the glorious age of duels over romance, where wounded pride and heartbreak didn't lead to therapy. They led to pistols at dawn. From the 17th to 19th centuries across Europe and the Americas, duels were society's favourite way for men to resolve issues of honour, especially when those issues involved women, or sometimes men, or sometimes just the suspicion that someone looked at someone else's fiancée the wrong way at a party. You're probably thinking, really? A gunfight over a look? Oh yes. Entire duels were fought over rumours, a whispered comment, an intercepted letter, a single dance with someone who wasn't yours to dance with. Any of it could be interpreted as an insult to honour, which had to be defended at all costs. Apparently the male ego has never quite appreciated ambiguity. Let's take a particularly juicy case, the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr in 1804. Technically it was political, but underneath that cold exterior were years of personal slights, veiled insults, and possibly, just possibly, a romantic rivalry buried beneath the ambition. Burr shot Hamilton dead, and even though he technically won, The whole event ruined his political career. That's the thing with duels. They rarely solved anything, but they definitely made everything worse. Now imagine you're a woman in the 18th century. You find out two men have challenged each other to a duel over you. At first, maybe it feels flattering, passionate, dangerous. But quickly, you realise you don't get a say in this. Your affections have been turned into property, a trophy to be won at the cost of blood. And if the wrong one dies, you don't just lose a suitor, you might lose your safety, your future, or your social standing. Women caught in the middle of these deadly dances often faced intense scrutiny. If you grieved the wrong man too openly, you were seen as cold or unfaithful. If you moved on too quickly, you were accused of being the cause of the duel in the first place. And if both men died, well, you became the tragic centerpiece in a cautionary tale told by grandmothers for decades. Some duels didn't even involve the woman being aware of the conflict. A man might challenge a rival over her honour simply because he imagined an insult. Some left a note, others didn't. A few rare women, especially in France and Italy, challenged men themselves, either for revenge or for love. One woman disguised herself as a man for years to duel on behalf of her lovers, because if love couldn't be safe, at least it could be dramatic. Now for a strange fringe detail. In some dueling traditions, if the injured party didn't want bloodshed, they could insist on a symbolic resolution, like cutting a button off their opponent's coat with a sword. Very theatrical, very, we are gentlemen, not murderers. But often, especially when pride and love collided, that gentler path was rejected in favour of gunpowder and bravado. The weapons themselves varied. Swords were popular earlier on, elegant, personal, messy. But pistols became the trend in the 18th century, offering a quick, final solution. Duels were technically illegal in most places, but laws were often ignored. Police would happen to arrive 10 minutes too late. Judges would conveniently lose paperwork. Because as absurd as dueling was, it was also deeply woven into cultural identity, especially for the upper class. And here's where it gets really ironic. While men were risking their lives to defend their honour, many of the women they fought over were suffering under the weight of entirely different social dangers. A woman caught in a scandalous relationship could lose her inheritance, her home, her children, or be institutionalised for hysteria. Love for women was dangerous in a silent, invisible way, one that didn't always leave blood in a field but left lifelong damage nonetheless. Even more ironic, most duels didn't end in death. A lot of them ended in missed shots, shallow wounds, or agreed surrenders. Because deep down, most of these men didn't want to die. They just wanted to not look weak, so they'd shoot into the air or aim wide, then pretend the matter was settled. Honour restored. Nothing says masculinity like mutual attempted murder, apparently. One historical oddity. In 19th century Russia, it was fashionable for poets to duel. Poets. Fragile, emotionally volatile poets. Alexander Pushkin, one of Russia's greatest literary minds, died in a duel over rumours about his wife. People still debate whether the rumours were even true. What isn't debated? That a genius died because society taught men that death was preferable to embarrassment. So here you are, hand trembling, pistol heavy in your grip. Across from you is someone you used to call a friend. Now you're fighting over love, or maybe pride, or maybe both. A signal will come, and you'll both fire. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll miss each other and laugh about it later over wine. But maybe not. Maybe this is the day everything changes, over a kiss that was never yours to give. Because love wasn't just an emotion back then, it was a test of manhood, a public spectacle, a reason to destroy yourself with dramatic flair. And if you died for it, well, at least you died with honour, which is exactly the kind of nonsense they engraved on your tombstone while your lover married someone else. You're standing in a grand hall lit by flickering torches and echoing with too many footsteps and not enough laughter. You're wearing your finest tunic or gown, the fabric heavy with embroidery and expectation, and you're sweating, not from the heat, but from the knowledge that tonight's party isn't just about dancing or feasting. It's about transactions, calculations, dowries, and your value is being measured in gold, land, and livestock, not love. Welcome to the medieval marriage market, where falling in love with the wrong person could cost your entire family everything, and sometimes their lives. Let's say you've done something unthinkable. You've fallen for someone without consulting your father, your uncles, or that one cousin who acts like he's your lawyer even though he's 12. You love this person, actually love them, and they love you back, that's adorable and catastrophic. Because love, in this world, isn't the goal of marriage. Marriage is an economic contract, and love, that's just a problem that happens when you don't read the fine print. Enter the dowry system, a centuries-old custom that transformed marriage into an elite exchange of assets. A dowry was what a bride's family paid to the groom's family: money, land, sometimes a whole herd of sheep to sweeten the deal, and the higher your status, the higher the stakes. A misaligned marriage wasn't just a disappointment, it was a financial disaster. There's a real case from Renaissance Florence where a noble family arranged a marriage for their daughter with a powerful merchant clan. The dowry was enormous, enough to buy several vineyards and at least one extremely moody sculptor. But the girl had secretly fallen for someone else, a lesser noble with no money, just poetry and cheekbones. They tried to elope. They failed. Her father demanded the lover's execution, the merchant family sued for breach of contract, and the girl, locked in a convent until she died. Romantic, huh? Dowries were so central that entire families went bankrupt trying to marry off their daughters well. In fact, many noble families kept meticulous dowry books, ledgers that read like tragic spreadsheets of who cost what and whether it was worth it. A daughter who married beneath her station wasn't just rebellious, she was a walking financial loss. In some regions, if a daughter eloped without consent, the family lost their entire investment. Lands were reclaimed, titles were stripped. Think of it like a romantic version of foreclosure. Meanwhile, in India, the dowry system became deeply entrenched over centuries. Originally intended as a form of inheritance, it twisted into a social pressure cooker that led to horrific consequences. Even today, dowry-related violence remains a real and tragic issue. In the past, though, it was arguably even worse. If a husband's family decided a dowry wasn't enough, they could demand more, sometimes with threats, sometimes with fire. Yes, literal fire. Cases of bride burning were documented as early as the medieval period, though often brushed off as kitchen accidents. Scholars still debate the full extent of it, but the evidence is chilling, all because someone wanted to marry or be married for love instead of currency. And this wasn't just about brides. Grooms could be just as entangled. In certain Italian city-states, if you were a second or third son, you were basically a financial bargaining chip. Your marriage might be arranged to merge two banks, stop a feud, or secure a silk trade deal. The fact that you might have, opinions about your future spouse, irrelevant. Love, again, was not the point. A strange and slightly hilarious fringe case. In 15th century Germany, a noblewoman's dowry accidentally included a pig she'd grown weirdly attached to. She insisted it stay with her after the wedding. The groom refused. A legal dispute followed, escalating to the point where local magistrates had to write an official ruling about marital pig ownership. True love, apparently, is complicated by swine. But not all consequences were funny. If dowry expectations weren't met, or if a union didn't produce political advantages, things could turn violent. In some noble houses, poison became the go-to solution for a romantic mistake. Oops, our daughter married beneath her rank could quickly become, oops, she died of consumption after drinking suspicious wine. The real cause? A mixture of social pressure, arsenic, and really toxic family dynamics. Even in less dramatic settings, love was dangerous when it came into contact with dowry logic. If a girl fell for a boy from a poorer family and tried to refuse an arranged marriage, she might be sent away, married off early, or beaten into submission. Families would stage interventions, entire dinners where uncles, priests, and hired flatterers would lecture her about duty. If she still resisted, the family might disown her. In some cases, they declared her mentally unfit, locking her away in institutions or convents, because clearly anyone who valued feelings over finances must be insane. One historical debate still raging among scholars is whether dowry systems actually improved social mobility or locked people into rigid caste systems. Some argue that dowries allowed families to buy better social status. Others say it created a system where daughters were commodified and sons became glorified auction items. Either way, love, genuine, messy, irrational love, was an unwelcome guest. So picture yourself again, back in that hall, the torches burning low. You're standing in a dress that cost more than your village. Across the room is someone you love, someone you'll never be allowed to speak to again. and next to you is someone else, someone richer, colder, and completely indifferent to the fact that your heart is currently being ground into the floorboards. The priest begins to speak. You nod at the right times, you sign the papers, and as the ink dries, so does the last little flicker of rebellion. Love didn't just fail, it was never invited to the party. Because in this world, you don't marry for the heart, you marry for the house. And houses don't care who you're crying over, you're in a crowd now. The street is narrow, the stones under your feet uneven, and people are pressing in on every side, tight enough that you can smell the mix of sweat, incense and roasting chestnuts clinging to their clothes. Someone's shouting. Not angry, just loud, calling out a prayer in a language you don't speak. Or maybe you do, but not quite the same way. Because you're in love with someone who doesn't share your faith. And in this particular time and place, that's the kind of love that gets people dragged into alleys, burned at the stake, or simply erased. Cross-religious love, between Jews and Christians, Muslims and Hindus, Protestants and Catholics, has always been the kind of romance that makes neighbours twitch, and governments pass laws. It's not just about hearts, it's about tribes, and historically tribes don't like sharing. Take medieval Spain, for example. During the so-called convivencia, Jews, Christians and Muslims lived side by side, for a while. But once the Christian Reconquista began to reassert dominance, the idea of a Christian falling for a Muslim or Jew became more than just taboo. It became treasonous. Laws were passed forbidding interfaith marriages, converts were watched with suspicion, and children from mixed unions were often taken from their parents and raised by the dominant faith, usually the church. Because obviously, the best way to handle forbidden love is to kidnap babies. Now let's say you're in 15th century Granada. You're Christian, your beloved is Muslim, and you've somehow kept it a secret. You meet at the market in a quiet corner between baskets of figs. You don't speak loudly or often, but there's a rhythm to your stolen glances, a kindness exchanged through silence. It should be beautiful. But the consequences are staggering. If you're caught, it won't just be your family that disowns you. The entire community may turn against you. One whisper, and you're both hauled before a magistrate, accused of apostasy, corruption, or sorcery through affection, which is somehow an actual phrase that shows up in inquisitorial records. And if you think it's just a medieval problem, try early modern Europe. In Protestant and Catholic territories alike, interfaith couples were treated like ticking bombs. Marrying across the confessional divide was a guaranteed way to get kicked out of your parish, or worse, marked by both sides as untrustworthy. Catholic priests refused to perform the wedding. Protestant communities treated you like you'd kissed the Pope. It wasn't just a private affair, it was a public scandal, and it didn't end well. One tragic example comes from Elizabethan England, where a Protestant woman named Anne fell in love with a Catholic recusant during the height of anti-Catholic paranoia. They married in secret. When it came out, Anne's husband was arrested as a potential conspirator, suspected of colluding with Jesuits to subvert the crown. She was interrogated, humiliated, and eventually died in childbirth while he languished in prison. Their story is buried in a footnote of Tudor history, but their pain probably felt eternal. There's an open scholarly debate around how many of these interfaith romances were genuine and how many were strategic, especially in places like the Ottoman Empire, where conversion through marriage could improve your status. A Christian woman might marry a Muslim man and convert, gaining protection. But was it love? Was it survival? Or both? Scholars argue about agency, coercion, and the blurred lines between them. The only thing clear, love didn't happen in a vacuum, it happened in a pressure cooker. And then there were the communities where these relationships sparked literal riots. In 19th century India, under British colonial rule, love between Hindus and Muslims, or worse, between Indians and British officers, was a powder keg. One high-profile case involved a Muslim woman converting to Hinduism to marry her lover, which sparked a furious protest and a legal battle that gripped the entire region. The British, of course, made it worse by deciding who was legally allowed to love whom, because nothing says romantic enlightenment like imperial bureaucracy. Meanwhile, in Jewish communities scattered across Europe and the Middle East, interfaith relationships were often seen as existential threats. A daughter marrying a Christian could lead to exile or excommunication. A son doing the same might be disowned, even declared spiritually dead. Some families held mourning rituals for children who converted or married outside the faith, shivers for the living. Love didn't just separate people from institutions, it tore them from their identities. Here's a lesser-known, fringe detail. In early Islamic Spain, there are records of Christian women disguising themselves as Muslims to enter mosques and catch a glimpse of their lovers. One was caught and sentenced to death, not for espionage or blasphemy, but for disturbing the order of divine separation, as if love itself had trespassed against God. And yet, despite the danger, these couples kept falling for each other. In every century, on every continent, in every religion, someone looked past the barrier and said, "I choose you anyway," and usually paid the price. But sometimes, they got away with it. A hidden marriage, a secret life in the woods, a quiet house where the call to prayer mixed with church bells and no one came knocking. You're standing there now, in this imaginary street with all its invisible laws. The person you love brushes past you, their hand grazing yours just long enough to make your heart catch. But you can't speak. You can't be seen. You can't even smile. The world will call it blasphemy, treason, corruption. But you know it's just love. Quiet, honest, and in the wrong time. Because history didn't need war to destroy love. Sometimes all it took was a different god. The drapes are silk, the candles perfumed, and the ceiling's high enough to make your neck ache if you stare too long. This is wealth. Not rich merchant wealth. This is dynastic power, passed down through bloodlines, painted onto walls, carved into family crests, stitched into every hem of your gown or doublet. And love? Love has entered the building like a fox in a peacock coop. You feel it already. Eyes across the ballroom, tension under every polite smile. But this isn't a fairy tale. This is a scandal waiting to blow a hole through generations of carefully arranged power. Welcome to the elite social circles of pre-modern Europe, where aristocratic affairs didn't just ruin reputations. They rewrote political maps, redrew alliances, and in some cases, started wars. Love, here, wasn't dangerous because it was forbidden. It was dangerous because it was explosive. You're someone's daughter, or son, or sibling, and everyone around you is watching. Not for the sake of your virtue exactly, but because one slip, one kiss, one whispered secret could tip the delicate balance your family's been managing for generations. Maybe your cousin is negotiating a treaty through marriage. Maybe your aunt is trying to get a dowry renegotiated. But you've just decided to fall in love with the wrong person, someone whose bloodline threatens the current order, someone from the other house. Let's talk about one of history's juiciest examples, the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. Two royal families locked in a glittering passive-aggressive chess match across Europe. Every marriage was a power move, every affair a diplomatic incident. One whispered tryst between members of opposing dynasties could spark rumours of betrayal, or worse, claims to thrones. There were cases where heirs were suspected of being illegitimate simply because their mothers were known to entertain, shall we say, non-husband visitors. And here's the thing, everyone knew. These weren't secret affairs in a peasant's hayloft. These were public enough that court painters sometimes deliberately avoided eye contact in portraits, lest they imply too much. Gossip was currency in these courts. It was traded, hoarded, and used to ruin people. If you loved the wrong person, it wouldn't stay private for long. Take Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia. She had lovers, plural. Her affections were a national concern. Did she favour a particular noble? That man's entire family could rise overnight. Did she grow bored of another? That same family could be quietly removed from court and left to rot in the provinces. Love, in her world, wasn't sentimental. It was structural. A well-placed romance could realign everything from military leadership to estate inheritances. Even stranger, sometimes the affairs weren't even about love. They were about counterpower. An aristocratic woman might take a lover not because she adored him, but because aligning herself with a powerful man offered protection, or leverage, or a chance to survive a marriage she never wanted. In that sense, love affairs weren't betrayals. They were survival tactics. There's a fringe case from the 18th century France involving the Duchess of Polignac, one of Queen Marie Antoinette's closest companions. Rumours swirled for years that their relationship went beyond friendship, an emotional entanglement that scandalised conservatives at court. Whether it was romantic, platonic, or somewhere complicated in between, it destabilised the court's image. Nobles who disapproved of the Queen's affection for her favourite began to undermine her influence. sowing seeds of the unrest that would later devour the monarchy. And don't think men were immune. Take Charles II of England. His reign practically floated on a sea of mistresses: Barbara Palmer, Nell Gwyn, Louise de Querouaille. Each affair wasn't just tabloid fodder, it had political implications. If Charles favoured a Catholic mistress, Parliament noticed. If she whispered something in bed that made its way into royal policy, that was practically sedition by pillow talk. Historians still debate how much power these mistresses truly had. Were they manipulating kings? Or were they puppets themselves, used, discarded and blamed for decisions made in smoky council rooms? The truth, as always, is messier than legend. Some wielded immense influence. Others were scapegoats with nice jewellery. All of them, however, became targets the moment love entered the equation. And here's the kicker. These weren't poor, star-crossed lovers sneaking around in candlelit ruins. These were people with everything. Power, wealth, titles, and they still couldn't love freely. Because love, especially unapproved love, was a threat. It threatened bloodlines, treaties, legitimacy. You didn't fall in love to be happy. You fell in love and immediately regretted it, because now you were part of a scandal with the shelf life of a monarch's reign. So let's picture you again. You're at a masked ball. Of course there's a masked ball. And across the room is someone who shouldn't be here. Someone wearing the wrong colours. Someone whose family has been feuding with yours for longer than either of you have been alive. But when they touch your hand during the next dance, something changes. The music dulls, the room fades, and for a second it's just you. But then the song ends, the masks come off, and reality slams back into place. If your father finds out, you'll be married off to someone else by the end of the week. If their family finds out, yours could be accused of sedition. There's no winning here, just hiding, or running, or ruining everything. Because love in a silk-lined world wasn't a refuge, it was a crack in the dam. One affair could flood a kingdom with war, shame, or blood, and still, people kept dancing. You're sitting at a desk now, a real one, polished wood, maybe mahogany, with a drawer that sticks when you try to open it too fast. There's a quill in your hand and a candle flickering just close enough to make the ink shimmer. You're writing, slow, careful, probably a little dramatic, and every word you put down is dangerous, because this isn't just a letter, it's a love letter, and in the wrong hands it could kill you. In many parts of history, paper didn't just carry ink, it carried confessions, scandals, crimes. One little note that read, "I miss you," could be read by someone else as, "I intend to betray the king," or worse, "I intend to sleep with his wife." Either way, if someone finds your letter, they won't respond with a lecture. They'll respond with chains. Let's rewind to Tudor England, where court life was essentially a 24/7 reality show, but with more beheadings. Everything you did or said was scrutinised, and writing love letters was basically asking to be framed for something. Remember Anne Boleyn? Sure you do. She and Henry VIII exchanged love letters long before they were married, and after they were married, the letters between her and various men at court were used as evidence of adultery. Whether they were actually romantic or just friendly is still debated, but that didn't matter. The implication was enough to execute her. That's the real danger. Implication. You didn't need a signed confession. All it took was a suspicious turn of phrase, a flourish too many, a line that sounded like it meant something more, even if you didn't mean it that way, even if it wasn't from you. Because here's the real kicker. Letters were forged. A lot. If someone wanted to ruin you, all they had to do was fake a note in your handwriting, add a dash of romantic nonsense, and drop it somewhere public. In France, during the affair of the diamond necklace, a scandal so ridiculous it sounds made up, a forged letter supposedly from Queen Marie Antoinette played a central role. It wasn't a love letter exactly, but it had just enough romantic overtone to make it believable. The result? A national scandal, a reputation destroyed, and one more nail in the coffin of the monarchy, all because someone knew how to fake intimacy in ink. And here's a fringe fact that might make you think twice before putting pen to paper. In imperial China, scholars and courtiers often wrote love poetry as a form of flirtation. Beautiful stuff. Delicate metaphors, birds in spring, all that. But if those poems were found by the wrong person, especially if you were married or the object of your affection was, things got brutal. Poets could be dismissed, banished, or executed. Because a poem wasn't just a poem, it was intent. and intent in the imperial court was criminal. In some cases, love letters were used as weapons. Spycraft 101. During World War I, for example, agents would disguise intelligence reports as romantic correspondence. Darling, I long to see you again when the sun crosses the field might actually mean attack at dawn, flank left. If the enemy intercepted it, hopefully they thought you were just sappy, not strategic. Of course, if your side misread it, you could end up shot for espionage by your own government. Messy business, this whole loving while also being a spy thing. But most letters weren't part of some grand conspiracy. They were just people trying to connect, to confess something they didn't dare say out loud, to be soft in a world that punished softness, and that vulnerability made them a target. In Puritan New England, if a woman received too many letters from a man, it could be used as proof of inappropriate intimacy, even if they weren't lovers, even if nothing ever happened. The paper itself was evidence. Some lovers, aware of the risk, developed their own codes. They'd use flowers as metaphors, reverse their names, or write entire letters using cipher wheels. One famous 18th century French noblewoman corresponded with her secret lover, using a prearranged list of symbols that translated to key words: you, kiss, danger, wait. The letters were hidden in books, passed through servants, or tucked behind religious icons, and still, one day, someone slipped. The message was intercepted. She was sent to a convent, he was sent to the colonies. They never saw each other again. Even in the 19th century, during the so-called Romantic era, love letters were both more common and more perilous than ever. Young women kept albums of pressed flowers and notes from admirers, but if a parent found something too passionate, too poetic, that girl's entire future could vanish overnight. An engagement cancelled, a reputation destroyed, all over a letter that said too much, or just enough. And let's not forget that in many cultures, even being able to write a love letter was a privilege. Literacy wasn't universal, so lovers often dictated their feelings to scribes. Yes, scribes. Imagine pouring your heart out and having to speak it aloud to a middle-aged man chewing on a reed pen, then trusting him to deliver your soul on parchment without judging you. And if he didn't like what you were saying, maybe he edits, maybe he warns someone. Love had middlemen, and those middlemen were terrifying. So you're back at that desk now, quill trembling slightly as you sign your name. You fold the letter carefully, you kiss the seal because you're dramatic like that, and hand it off to someone you think you can trust. Then you wait. Days pass, no response, and then one night your door bursts open. Not with love, but with soldiers. They found the letter, someone read it, and now you're being escorted somewhere dark because your heart spoke louder than it should have. Because in a world where silence was safety, writing how you felt was the most dangerous thing you could do. The air is thick with smoke, charcoal, sweat, and something else you can't quite name. You're in the market of a bustling city, somewhere along a trade route that smells of spices and salt. But something's off. The noise is too loud, the tension too sharp. You're not here to buy anything. You're searching for someone who's already been taken, because the person you love has disappeared, not because of war or illness, but because they were sold. Tonight love walks into the heartless machinery of slavery and comes out broken. Across centuries and continents, people have been torn from their homes, shackled, renamed, and treated as property. And while we often think of slavery in economic or political terms, there's another side rarely spoken about. What happens to love when one or both lovers are enslaved? What does intimacy look like when agency is gone? And how do you hold on to someone who can be sold away from you at any moment, with no notice, no goodbye? You're in West Africa in the 1700s. You've grown up with someone. You've loved them quietly. Maybe you've even promised marriage. But one morning raiders come. Your village is attacked. You're knocked unconscious. When you wake, they're gone. Days later you hear whispers. They've been taken to the coast, bound for the ships. You can't follow. You can't stop it. You can only live with the ache of what might have been. Or maybe you're the one on the ship, chained, starved, surviving, and still, somehow, you think of them. Not because it helps, but because it's the only part of your life that hasn't been stripped away yet. This wasn't rare. Enslaved people across Africa, the Americas, Asia, were often forcibly separated from their partners. On plantations in the Caribbean and American South, families were routinely torn apart. A husband sold to one owner, a wife to another, children taken from both. Love didn't just die, it was weaponized. Owners deliberately separated couples to assert control. Emotional pain became another tool of subjugation. And yet, somehow, love found a way to exist. Secret marriages happened in the dead of night, performed by elders or whispered into the dark. Rings made from twisted wire, vows spoken in hushed tones, no paperwork, no priests, just two people daring to claim each other in a world built to erase them. One extraordinary story comes from the archives of Louisiana in the 1800s. An enslaved man who walked miles every Sunday to visit his wife on a neighbouring plantation. It took half the night. He returned before dawn to avoid punishment. He did this for years, through storms, illness, injury. Love was not allowed, but he loved anyway. Still the threat loomed. At any moment she could be sold. Or he, no warning, no appeal. And once sold, she might be forced into another marriage, not one chosen, but assigned. Because slaveholders often arrange partnerships among enslaved people for breeding purposes. Yes, breeding. Love had nothing to do with it. Consent didn't exist. These were forced pairings meant to increase labour stock, and if someone resisted, they were beaten, starved, or raped into submission. So what happens to love under that weight? Sometimes it hides. Other times, it explodes into tragedy. There's a documented case of a man in Virginia who, after learning that his wife was about to be sold south, tried to flee with her and their child. They were caught. The child was taken. He was executed. And she vanished from the records. No one knows what happened to her. But the story lingers. A love story told in court transcripts and ledgers. Love as crime. Love as rebellion. In many of these stories, scholars debate the definition of romantic love. Some argue that enslaved people, denied the luxury of choice, formed relationships out of necessity, not affection. Others insist that to reduce these unions to survival alone is to strip them of humanity all over again. Maybe both are true. Maybe love in captivity is both fierce and fragile, beautiful and burdened, a desperate attempt to be human in a system that insists you're not. And love didn't only exist between the enslaved. There were also relationships, complicated, often horrifying, between enslaved individuals and their enslavers. Coercion disguised as affection. Relationships where power imbalance made any concept of consent meaningless. And yet, in some cases, there were real feelings involved, or so the enslavers claimed. Some freed their lovers, some kept them hidden, some had children together. The result? A tangled legacy of pain and power, intimacy and exploitation. One fringe case from Brazil in the 19th century tells of a Portuguese merchant who freed an enslaved woman he claimed to love. He gave her a home, treated her as a wife in private, and sent their children to school. But legally, she remained vulnerable. When he died, his family contested the will, claimed she'd manipulated him. The court sided with them. She was evicted. The children were denied inheritance. Her love story ended not with freedom, but with erasure. And yet, people continued to love, risked punishment to hold each other, named children after lost partners, kept oral histories alive with the names of those they once held, if only for a little while. You're standing in that market again. You hear a laugh you think you recognize. You turn. It's not them. It never is. But for a second, your heart believed. And that's what makes love dangerous in a world of bondage. Because love gives hope. Hope leads to resistance. And resistance in these systems is unforgivable. Because when someone tries to own your body, love is the one thing they can't touch, unless they can break it. You're coughing. Not the casual, I swallowed wrong kind. This one comes from deep in your lungs, thick and rattling, like something inside you is rotting. You pull your scarf tighter, but it doesn't help. No one's looking at you with sympathy. They're stepping away. Fast. You know why? Because everyone thinks you're cursed. And the worst part? You might be. You've fallen in love during a plague. Not great timing. Throughout history, plagues and epidemics haven't just decimated populations. They've shattered communities, rewritten belief systems, and made ordinary things feel dangerous. And love? Love was suddenly as risky as rats, bad air, or unwashed hands. It didn't matter if you were married, engaged, or just starting to catch feelings. If someone around you so much as sneezed, Romance became a liability. Not emotionally, physically. The person you kissed last night might be the one who kills you tomorrow. Let's rewind to the Black Death in the 14th century, because if we're going dark, we might as well go full medieval. Europe loses between 30% to 60% of its population in a matter of years. Whole towns vanish. Mass graves appear. And into that madness, two people try to find each other. Maybe they were courting before the outbreak. Maybe they met during the chaos, running from the same village, hiding in the same barn. It doesn't matter. What matters is that their love now exists in a world that considers affection suspicious and intimacy suicidal. You visit your lover, you're exposing yourself, you touch them, you might as well dig your own grave, and God help you if they die and you survive, because you'll be shunned, maybe even blamed. Some communities accused lovers of being the source of infection, especially if they were new to town. You didn't just lose your partner, you lost your place in society. And yet, love didn't stop. People still snuck out after curfew, secretly met in plague-ridden alleys. There are records of priests performing hasty marriages at the edge of graveyards. One couple in Florence reportedly married just hours before both collapsed, dying within minutes of each other. The priest later said it was the most sincere love he'd ever seen. Others called it madness. Either way, the tombstone was shared. One of the strange things about plague times is how violently people swung between indulgence and abstinence. In one moment, total abstinence. People refusing to marry, to kiss, to even stand close. In the next, hedonism. People got drunk. They hooked up with strangers. Some decided, if we're all going to die, we might as well enjoy the ride. And for some, that meant falling, deeply, recklessly, in love. In Renaissance Venice, there were so many secret love affairs during the plague of 1575 that the city government had to send out masked officials, literal plague police, to catch people breaking isolation. They'd post guards outside homes under quarantine, but lovers found ways around it. Ropes tied between balconies, notes left inside bread deliveries. One couple even disguised themselves as plague doctors to sneak through the city. They were caught, publicly flogged, but at least they matched. Scholars still debate whether plague brought people emotionally closer or ripped them apart. Did it intensify bonds because death was always nearby? Or did it make love too risky to pursue? There's evidence for both. Diaries from survivors speak of overwhelming fear, but also describe moments of unexpected connection. Widows remarrying within days, young people defying curfews for a kiss. Because when the world feels like it's ending, love becomes either the dumbest thing you can do or the only thing that makes sense. Let's fast forward to the early 20th century, the 1918 influenza pandemic. It killed more people than World War I, and again, love was caught in the crossfire. In Paris, one soldier returned from the front lines to find his fiancée quarantined in a hospital. He bribed a nurse, snuck into her ward in the middle of the night, kissed her, and died 3 days later. She survived. She never married again. Her family said she kept a small tin box under her bed with the ticket stub from the tram he took to reach her. Love, as usual, left artefacts. There's even a strange fringe case from Eastern Europe during a cholera outbreak, where people believed that passionate emotions could attract illness. If you were too happy, too in love, too physically affectionate, the disease would find you. So young lovers pretended to be indifferent in public, acting cold to each other, even cruel, just to avoid suspicion. One woman reportedly whispered, "I love you" in Latin backwards so no one would recognize it. Romance as code, desperation as disguise, and always the threat. If your partner dies, you become the suspected carrier. Widows were often driven from towns, children taken away. In some towns, lovers of the dead were burned with the corpses to keep the plague from spreading. It sounds like mythology, but court records show more than one case where an accused carrier of affection was executed or left to die in quarantine zones. You're walking now through a city that smells of rot and roses. Death carts pass in the street. You hear the clanging of bells, the chants of monks. But through it all, there's that one voice you recognize. A whisper through the shutters, a hand held too long, a risk taken again and again. You know it's foolish. You know it could kill you. But you also know it's the only thing that feels human. Because in a time when touching someone might end your life, loving them anyway is the bravest thing you'll ever do. It starts with a whisper, a neighbour, a cousin, maybe even your own mother. They say it quietly, as if the words themselves might grow teeth. Think of the family's honour. You laugh at first, because you've done nothing wrong. You're just in love. But in this time, in this place, that alone is enough to become a walking disgrace. Because love here doesn't belong to you, it belongs to them, and they will do anything, to protect what they think is their reputation. You're in a culture where honour isn't about what you do, it's about what people believe you've done. And if you're a woman, your body is their reputation. If you're a man, your choices must reflect control. So when you step outside those lines, fall for someone unacceptable, refuse an arranged marriage, or simply get caught speaking to the wrong person in the wrong alley, you've broken something bigger than trust. You've shamed your family. And shame, it demands blood. Honour killings, they call them. It sounds almost medieval, like something from far-off lands and forgotten centuries, but it isn't. It was then, and it's still now. This story plays out in ancient Babylon and modern suburbs, in dusty village courtyards and fluorescent-lit kitchens. It's the kind of love story that never gets told on greeting cards, because it ends with mourning clothes instead of wedding dresses. Let's go back to the Ottoman Empire, where legal records detail women beaten to death or quietly drowned after rumours of inappropriate relationships. Not proven, just rumoured. Sometimes no relationship even existed. Maybe she smiled at someone. Maybe someone else wanted her and couldn't have her. Honour is fragile that way. It doesn't need evidence, it just needs witnesses. One documented case involves a 17-year-old girl who was killed by her brothers because she was seen talking to a Christian boy near a well. They didn't ask her what happened. They didn't care. They said they had to wash away the stain. Centuries later, in parts of rural Pakistan, India, Albania, even some immigrant communities in Europe and North America, the same logic persists. She made us look bad. She betrayed us. She brought shame. All of these become justifications for murder, and not by strangers, by fathers, by brothers, by cousins who once braided her hair. And it's not always about gender either. Men too have been victims, falling in love with someone considered beneath them, across caste lines, or of a rival family. In some cases, being too emotionally vulnerable is enough to mark a man as weak, and weakness is the one thing an honourable man can't afford. In 18th century Sicily, duels were fought over dishonoured sisters, whether real or imagined. One man reportedly stabbed his sister's suitor 14 times, not because the suitor had harmed her, but because she had written him poetry. He said the letters proved she had given too much of herself. She never saw the man again. She was married off to someone else 2 weeks later. Her brother, by the way, was praised. Now here's the particularly cruel twist. Sometimes the only way for a woman to survive was to marry her abuser, her rapist, her captor. Because once society labelled her spoiled, marriage was her only path to redemption. Legal systems too reinforced this. In many cultures, a man who violated a woman could avoid punishment if he married her, as if his crime became love if she agreed to the terms. Historians still argue about whether these laws were originally intended to protect women by giving them security, or whether they simply erased their agency entirely. Either way, the message was clear. Your worth is measured by how untouched you are, and love, real, messy, passionate love, touches you. There's a fringe case from medieval Jordan, preserved in local oral histories, of a couple who tried to escape their family's feud by fleeing into the desert. They survived for months, hiding in abandoned villages, moving at night. But eventually they were caught, not by the authorities, by their own relatives. She was stoned to death. He was beaten until he couldn't walk, but neither gave up the other's name, not even when begged. We were already dead, he later said, so we loved like ghosts. Even now, some honour killings are ruled as family matters, lightly punished or not at all. Communities protect the murderers, governments look away, and victims are buried quickly, often anonymously, their names a shame better forgotten. They loved, and that was their crime. But love fights back. In every era there are rebels, survivors, people who ran, hid, started new lives under different names, families who chose to break the cycle instead of repeat it. One modern story tells of a Turkish girl who fled to Germany to escape her brother's threats. She started over, learned the language, became a social worker for others like her. Her brother found her once, years later. She faced him in a public place, surrounded by witnesses. He left. She kept living. And here you are in the middle of a quiet evening reading this, wondering what it must be like to live in a world where being in love could get you killed by the people who raised you. But the truth is, you already do. It's just hidden in headlines, tucked into back pages. It doesn't happen to you until it does. Until someone you know is acting strange, bringing shame, falling for the wrong kind. And then it happens again, because in some places love is still not a right. It's a privilege, a gamble, a sword hanging by a thread. And when that thread snaps, it's not always the stranger who strikes. Sometimes it's the person who once kissed your forehead goodnight. You're breathing hard, your chest tight from the corset or the belt or the fear, maybe all three. You're not supposed to be out right now, certainly not dressed like this. Your boots are too large, your hair is hidden under a cap. You're playing a role that doesn't belong to you. Not on paper, not in the law, not in the mirror, but it's the only way to reach them, the only way to be with the person you love. So tonight, you're not who the world says you are. Tonight, you're whoever you need to be. Throughout history, love has made people rewrite their own identities just to survive it. And for some, the only path to romance was through disguise. You'll find these stories hidden between war reports and household records, tales of people who dressed as the opposite gender, changed their names, or forged entire new selves, just for a chance to love, and sometimes to live. Let's start with a classic case from the 18th century, Chevalier d'Eon. Assigned male at birth, d'Eon lived parts of their life as a man and other parts as a woman. They served as diplomat, soldier and spy for France, all while navigating secret affairs, political manipulation and social scrutiny. People still debate whether d'Eon's gender identity was strategic, sincere, or somewhere in between. But what's clear is that their relationships were deeply entangled with their need to shift presentation. Sometimes to survive, sometimes to love, always to stay ahead of the guillotine. Then there's Catalina de Arauso, the so-called Lieutenant Nun, who escaped a convent in 17th century Spain, disguised herself as a man, and lived an entire life as a soldier, swashbuckling across South America. Catalina flirted, seduced, and even duelled other men over women's affections, all while keeping their identity a secret. Eventually exposed, Catalina petitioned the Pope for a special dispensation to continue dressing and living as a man. The Pope, because history is weird, said yes. These weren't just theatrical stunts. In a world where gender defined who you could marry, where you could live, what you could inherit, and who you were allowed to touch, breaking those rules was radical and dangerous. People who dared to live outside their assigned roles were exiled, imprisoned, or executed. But still, they did it. Because the heart doesn't care about what's sewn on your birth certificate, it just wants to be held. In early modern Europe, some same-sex couples even passed as heterosexual by presenting one partner in a different gender role. In court records from the Netherlands, there's a case of two women, one of whom lived as a man, marrying in a church. When they were discovered, the community was scandalized, not because of love, but because of deception. The couple was separated. One was sentenced to death, the other was paraded through the town as a warning. But their letters, smuggled and copied, survived. They still called each other beloved, still said they would wait. The waiting, of course, lasted longer than either of them. There's a fringe case from 19th century Japan where a female samurai disguised herself as a man to join her lover in battle. They fought side by side for months before being discovered. Rather than face separation, they committed a joint seppuku, ritual suicide, under a tree. The spot is now a quiet shrine, with lovers sometimes tying red threads to its branches, hoping their bond will last longer than the samurai's did. Not all endings were so tragic. Some couples disappeared into the noise of cities. London, Paris and New York all had underground communities where people could live more freely, if they kept quiet. Boarding houses and apartments became shared sanctuaries. Some partners lived together as roommates for decades, sharing beds, diaries, and lives without ever being officially acknowledged. Their love stories weren't told in public, but they were carved into the backs of photographs, or folded into cookbooks, or kept in rings worn on chains beneath clothing. And then there's the question scholars still debate. Were these gender shifts purely performative, means to an end? Or were they early expressions of trans identity, non-binary identity, something else altogether? Some historians argue it's anachronistic to apply modern terms. Others say these people knew exactly who they were, long before the language existed to explain it. What's not up for debate is this. Pretending to be someone else to be with the person you love is one of the oldest and riskiest moves in the book. Shakespeare wrote entire plays about it. Real people bet their lives on it. For some, it was the only option. For others, it was the truest version of themselves finally getting to breathe. You're walking down a back street now, your borrowed boots clicking softly on the cobblestones. You glance up at the window above. A curtain moves. They're watching. You don't wave. That would be dangerous. But they'll meet you tonight. In the orchard. At the inn. At the edge of town. You'll trade names like other people trade rings. You'll pretend to be just friends. Just travellers. Just passing through. But you know, and they know, and that's enough. Because love doesn't care what name you use or what uniform you wear or what body the world says you should have. Love just wants to survive. And sometimes that means changing everything. Your clothes, your voice, your life. Not because you're faking who you are, but because you're finally trying to live as the person you've always been. You're kneeling in a pew, the stone beneath you cold, unforgiving and damp with centuries of whispered sins. The air is heavy with incense, the kind that clings to your clothes long after you've left, and the flicker of candlelight makes the saints' faces on the stained glass twitch ever so slightly, like they're watching, judging. Because you've done the one thing your vows told you not to do, you've fallen in love. Welcome to the cloistered world of monasteries and convents, where love wasn't just dangerous, it was sacrilege. Let's be clear, not everyone who joined religious life did it out of faith. Plenty were pressured. Some were offered as tithes. Others, especially women, had no other safe place to go. But once you were in, and that meant no lovers, no spouses, no hand-holding, no late-night confessions under moonlight. Your only acceptable object of desire was God. Anything else? Temptation. And temptation had a price. Yet despite centuries of rigid discipline, people still fell in love. Nuns fell for other nuns. Monks fell for kitchen workers. Priests fell for parishioners. In some cases, people joined religious orders just to be closer to the ones they loved. Because in a monastery, at least you weren't marrying someone else. You were preserving some quiet, sacred bond in a world that forbade it everywhere else. Take Heloise and Abelard. You probably know them, medieval Europe's most iconic forbidden lovers. She was a brilliant scholar. He was her tutor. Their affair scandalized the church. When she became pregnant, he arranged a secret marriage. Her uncle, outraged, had Abelard castrated. Heloise was forced into a convent. Abelard retreated to a monastery. They spent the rest of their lives apart, writing letters that still make scholars blush. Romantic. Yes. Also horrifying. Love cost them everything. Bodies, freedom, futures. But they kept writing. There's an especially strange case from the 17th century France where a monk and a nun in neighbouring institutions managed to fall in love entirely by exchanging notes left inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. The monastery baked them for the nuns, and someone figured out how to slip a little parchment between the crust and the crumb. It went on for months, until one note fell out mid-delivery. Both were punished. She confined in a silent cell he sent to a remote outpost. His records stopped shortly after. Hers continue. She never mentioned him again. Historians still argue about how often these kinds of romances happened. Were they rare flukes, or so common they were simply hushed up? Some monasteries, after all, were practically villages, busy, crowded, pulsing with human emotion. In Spain and Italy, records show repeated warnings from abbots about inappropriate closeness between certain monks. In one convent, 2 nuns were separated after being caught embracing too often. Their names are preserved in disciplinary notes, Sister Magdalena and Sister Beatrice. They were allowed to return to communal life after reflection and correction. But their letters continued. Hidden, coded, passed beneath doors. No one could stop them. Not really. And then there's the corruption. Because where rules exist, so do those willing to bend them, for the right price. Clergy had mistresses. Bishops fathered children. Wealthy families paid to have certain vows relaxed. In some places it was an open secret. Priests in love with widows, abbots with live-in housekeepers, nuns who bore children and were quietly reassigned. Hypocrisy flourished, of course, but so did deeply human relationships disguised as charity, mentorship, or confession. Here's a fringe fact to make your candle sputter. In the 13th century, A German nun named Hildegard was so obsessed with her spiritual companion, another nun, that she wrote entire volumes of love poetry disguised as divine visions. Her writings were so intense that modern scholars still debate whether they were mysticism or metaphorical eroticism. She called her friend the sweet song that stirs my blood, and the church canonized her, because when in doubt, call it a miracle, but let's not pretend it was all secret glances and stolen parchment. When discovered, forbidden love inside religious orders could be met with brutal consequences: public shaming, exile, starvation. Some monasteries built punishment cells specifically for those overcome by carnal sin. A priest caught with a lover might be defrocked and imprisoned. A nun might be buried alive. Yes, alive. There are court records from the late medieval period confirming this punishment in parts of Eastern Europe. Love wasn't just risky, it was terminal, and yet people kept loving. Monks wrote poetry under moonlight. Nuns carved hearts into their cell walls. Priests trembled at the sound of a familiar voice in confession. Love found cracks in the walls, even the ones built for God. You're there now, kneeling on that cold floor, heart racing. You glance sideways at the person beside you. Maybe another monk, maybe the visiting merchant's daughter, maybe someone you're not even allowed to speak to. You've said your prayers, sung your hymns, kept your vow of silence, but your soul is screaming. Every nerve in your body wants to reach out, just one touch, one moment. You don't, you can't, you may never, but your heart already has. Because no matter how high the cloister walls, how deep the cell, how loud the sermons about discipline and denial, love doesn't care. And in a place built to kill desire, loving someone anyway isn't just dangerous, it's holy defiance. The sound of boots echoes down a dirt-packed road, and the sun beats hard against the backs of soldiers who look more like shadows than men. You're standing behind them, watching as smoke unfurls over distant rooftops, smoke that used to mean cooking fires, now just the smoulder of something lost. Maybe you're holding a letter, maybe you're holding nothing at all. But the person you love is somewhere in that chaos, on the other side of the march, the gunfire, the flag. Not an enemy, not really, just someone born into the wrong side of the story. Tonight, love is caught beneath the boot of empire. There's a special kind of danger in falling for someone while empires expand, because conquest doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care if you locked eyes across a checkpoint or shared a smile through broken languages. It cares about lines on maps, about resources, about control, and anything that blurs those lines, like affection, empathy, or heaven forbid, a kiss, is seen as betrayal. You're a British officer in 19th century India, or a Dutch trader in Java, or a Roman centurion stationed in Gaul. You weren't supposed to fall in love. You were supposed to civilize, dominate, extract. But then you met someone whose eyes undid you. Maybe they taught you their language. Maybe you taught them yours. Maybe they hated you at first. And maybe they were right to. Because your presence here isn't just foreign. It's violence wrapped in uniforms and paperwork. History is full of these lopsided love stories. Colonizers who fell in love with locals. Locals who resisted, then didn't. Or did but couldn't show it. Power pulsed through every gesture. Was it real? Was it survival? Was it some mess of both? Let's take the Roman Empire, experts in conquest and equally proficient at mixing business with pleasure. Roman soldiers stationed across provinces often took local lovers. Some married, some left behind children, whole communities of half-Romanized people who spoke both the conqueror's tongue and the native prayers. Archaeologists have found grave inscriptions from women in North Africa, mourning Roman husbands who returned to the legions and never came back. The women weren't citizens, the unions weren't legal. But the grief was real. Flash forward to British-ruled India. White officers often had relationships with Indian women, sometimes cloaked in the language of love, often carried out in the shadow of hierarchy. These women were called bibi, companions, mistresses, wives in all but name. Some of these relationships were tender, even long-term, but they were never equal. When British officials later decided to clean up colonial society, bibis were dismissed. The men married English women. The children, if acknowledged, were sent to orphanages or back to England, their mothers left behind with nothing but memories and shame. One particularly devastating case involved an Indian woman named Kairan Nissa, who fell in love with a British officer in the late 1700s. He promised to marry her. They exchanged vows in private. She bore him a child. Then he was recalled to England. He left. She never saw him again. Her family, shamed by the scandal, stripped her of her inheritance. She died alone. He died titled, wealthy, and married to someone else. And this isn't just a story of colonizers exploiting locals. Sometimes it went the other way. A local guide might fall for a soldier. A translator might take in a wounded officer, nurse him back to health, fall in love, and be left behind when orders changed. Or worse, follow him, only to find herself unwelcome in the world he came from. There are letters, hidden in dusty archives, from women pleading for passage, recognition, the right to be reunited with the men they loved. Most went unanswered. Here's a fringe case to sink your heart. In the Philippines during Spanish rule, a Filipino woman and a young Spanish soldier eloped. They fled into the mountains, started a small life in secret. For years, they were thought dead. But when the man's regiment discovered them during a patrol, he was arrested for desertion. She was accused of seduction and witchcraft. The soldiers executed him. She was made to watch. No one knows what happened to her after that, but the locals say she still walks the mountain paths, holding his old uniform coat. Historians argue about how to interpret these relationships. Were they colonizer guilt softened by intimacy? Was there real affection under all that power imbalance? Or were these just new versions of the old story? One person holding all the power, the other trying to survive the fallout of being loved by someone who came to conquer? Even in the 20th century this pattern repeats. French soldiers during the Indochina War, American GIs during the Vietnam War. Each time, romance blossoms under the shadow of occupation, and each time, someone ends up left behind. In Vietnam, children born from American soldiers and Vietnamese women were called bui doi, dust of life. Many were abandoned. Many still search for their fathers. Love left them half belonging to a world that never wanted them. And then there's you, standing here, watching a horizon burn. You shouldn't have fallen for them. You've endangered them just by wanting them. Your uniform, your very name, is a symbol of everything they should hate. And maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they kissed you anyway, and that kiss was rebellion, for both of you. You wonder if you'll see them again. Orders come quickly in a place like this. Maybe tomorrow you'll be shipped elsewhere. Maybe they'll be dealt with by someone less sentimental. All you have is this moment, a shared look, a pressed flower, a goodbye that tastes like ash. Because when empires rise, love becomes collateral damage. When lines are drawn on maps, hearts are erased. And the cruelest part is not always hatred that does the harm. Sometimes it's love, with nowhere left to go. You're leaning against a carved wooden banister, watching as a party unfolds below you. Glittering jewels, swirling skirts, laughter like champagne bubbling through the air. But your eyes aren't on the celebration. They're locked on someone moving silently through the room, neither servant nor guest. Their smile is too precise, their hands too careful. They aren't here for the music or the wine, and neither are you. You're both watching each other because tonight, you're not lovers, you're spies. Welcome to the tangled world of espionage and seduction, where love wasn't just dangerous, it was tactical. Throughout history, the bedroom and the battlefield have always been closer than people like to admit. Intelligence agencies knew it, monarchs knew it, and anyone who's ever used flirtation to get someone talking at a tavern knows it too. Love, real or feigned, was one of the oldest weapons in the diplomatic arsenal, and using it often came at a steep cost. Start with the infamous Mata Hari, whose real name was Margareta Zell. She was an exotic dancer, a courtesan, and eventually, allegedly, a spy. During World War I, both the French and the Germans accused her of working for the other side. She charmed generals, seduced officers, and traded on desire like currency. When she was finally arrested by the French, she claimed her romances were real, not treasonous. They executed her anyway. Whether she was actually a spy or just a woman who loved too freely in the wrong era is still debated. Either way, her love life got her killed. And she wasn't alone. In nearly every major war, governments have trained operatives specifically to use seduction as a strategy. During the Cold War, the KGB deployed swallows, female agents, and ravens, male agents, to seduce diplomats, scientists, anyone with secrets. The CIA did the same, just with less poetic naming. Love wasn't an accident. It was an assignment. Imagine you're one of them. You're told to get close to a target, learn their habits, their weaknesses, their desires. And then you do the unthinkable. You actually fall for them. Now you're compromised, torn between duty and feeling. You're lying to the person who's made you forget your codename. You know the moment they find out who you are, it's over. But you stay. You lie. You touch their hand like it means something. Because it does, even if it shouldn't. This wasn't just a 20th century phenomenon. Go back to the courts of Renaissance Italy, where political marriages were common, but true loyalty was bought with flesh. The Medici used mistresses to extract secrets. The Borgias used love affairs to trap enemies. Letters from that time are filled with veiled threats disguised as flirtation. Tell me what I need, and I'll give you what you want. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the one being seduced was in on the game, but every so often someone forgot it was just strategy. They got attached, and then they got killed. A particularly strange fringe case comes from the 17th century England. A woman posing as a maid in a noble household fell in love with her Mark, a diplomat suspected of leaking secrets to the Spanish. She confessed her real identity during an intimate moment, swearing she'd rather die than deceive him further. He turned her in anyway. She was executed for treason. His reputation was restored. He later married someone else and called his late spy lover an unfortunate romantic. Cold, right? Sometimes espionage and love intersected in less glamorous ways. Enslaved people, servants and concubines were often forced into positions where information flowed. Some used their roles to pass secrets to resistance movements, even at the risk of brutal punishment. Others traded information for small freedoms, better rations, extra time with someone they cared about. Love and survival, tangled together like threads in a tapestry that no one would ever display. There's a more recent example from World War II, the story of Noor Inayat Khan, a British spy of Indian descent who parachuted into Nazi-occupied France. She worked undercover, constantly on the move, using multiple aliases. Despite the chaos, she developed deep friendships, even fell in love with someone she couldn't truly trust. She was eventually captured, tortured, and executed at Dachau. Her last word was liberté. The man she loved never knew what happened to her. He waited years before accepting she was gone. Historians still debate how much genuine romance played into the world of spycraft. Were these agents emotionally invested, or just brilliant actors? Were their targets ever truly unsuspecting, or was everyone playing the same game, hoping their heart wouldn't be the one to break first? But here's the thing, love doesn't care about classified information. You might start the affair to gather intel, you might memorize their security codes, their habits, the way they always tap twice on the window before they knock. But then they smile at you, laugh at your joke, fall asleep with their head on your chest, and suddenly the information you were sent to retrieve feels like betrayal. Because now you want to protect them, not expose them. And you're back at the railing, still watching. The party spins below. The person you're meant to seduce is heading toward the balcony. They don't know your real name. Don't know that in your coat pocket is a blade, a vial, or a message that could start or end a war. But you do. You know everything. And you wish you didn't. Because in the world of espionage, love is never clean. It's a mask you wear too long. A lie that becomes the truth. A touch that means more than it should. And eventually you'll have to choose, the mission or the moment. And whatever you choose, you lose. You're barefoot on a dirt path, heart thudding like a drum that refuses to keep quiet. You've been walking since before dawn, dress muddy at the hem, or your boots worn thin, depending on which version of this story you're living. The road behind you is full of locked doors, angry voices, and a future you didn't choose. The road ahead, uncertain, unforgiving. But one thing is clear, you're in love and you're running. Because tonight the only way to love freely is to elope, and you're praying to every god you've ever heard of that it works. Elopement sounds romantic now. Secret weddings, midnight escapes, a stolen kiss on the other side of a border. But for most of history, running away to marry wasn't just scandalous, it was criminal. In some places, it still is. You weren't just defying your parents, you were defying society, law, property contracts, religious rules, and in certain very unlucky cases, the monarchy. Let's rewind to the 18th century in Europe, where marriage laws were strict, complicated, and terrifyingly specific. If your parents didn't approve, if you were underage, or if your social class didn't match, you couldn't legally wed. The solution? Run. Scotland became famous for this, specifically a little village called Gretna Green. There, blacksmiths famously acted as impromptu priests, marrying runaway couples at the forge. Romantic, right? Sure. Until your furious family tracked you down with legal documents or actual swords. Some couples made it, most didn't. There's a tragic case from France circa 1721 where a young woman fled her estate with a low-ranking soldier. They were caught 2 towns away. He was beaten, branded, and sentenced to 20 years of military service in the colonies, essentially a slow death. She was returned to her family and placed in a convent for her own protection. She died 2 years later of what the records called melancholy, which is a polite way of saying no one cared enough to find out. In parts of India, during the colonial era and long before, eloping across caste lines was particularly dangerous. Couples were often hunted, punished, or killed by their own relatives. Even today, honour violence rooted in this history still lingers. But during the 1800s, entire villages were sometimes mobilised to chase down eloping couples. Public trials, social boycotts, murders covered as accidents. One young couple from Punjab fled to the hills, hiding with shepherds and surviving on goat's milk for weeks. When they were found, the boy was hanged in front of her. She was forced to marry someone else within the month, and not all elopements were out of rebellion. Some were attempts at rescue, a woman trying to avoid being married off to a violent man, a boy trying to keep his lover from being sold into servitude. These weren't romantic whims, they were last chances. They were, if we don't do this, we'll never see each other again moments, and the world punished them brutally. One little known but deeply sad case comes from medieval Italy. A noblewoman, barely 16, fell in love with the family's stable hand. They ran. They made it as far as the countryside outside Verona. A group of her cousins, hired like mercenaries, caught them. She begged for mercy. They gave her an ultimatum: come home quietly or watch him die. She agreed. As soon as they turned their backs, she stabbed herself in the chest. He was executed anyway. The family called it a lesson to other girls. The locals built a shrine that was later torn down by church officials. Too romantic, they said. Too dangerous. Even royal families weren't exempt. In 19th century Austria, Archduchess Maria Theresa's granddaughter eloped with a count, and the scandal nearly ruptured diplomatic ties. The couple was exiled to a distant province stripped of titles and forbidden from returning to court. Their love letters, later discovered, are full of hope and terror. "If they come for you first," she wrote, "don't look at me. Let them believe I never mattered." Eloping was also a gamble with legality. In England before 1836, marriages had to be performed in the Church of England to be legally binding, meaning if you were Catholic, Jewish or nonconformist, your elopement might not count. Children could be declared illegitimate, wills ignored, widows left penniless. It wasn't just about love, it was about property, legacy, bloodlines. Your feelings were less important than your father's ledger. Here's a fringe detail. In early 20th century America, some hotel owners in remote towns kept emergency wedding kits, paperwork, rings, and a minister on call for couples fleeing angry fathers or strict judges. One hotel in Nevada reportedly married over 500 eloping couples between 1915 and 1935, many of whom showed up with nothing but a suitcase, a promise, and 2 train tickets pointing in opposite directions if it all went wrong. Some couples faked their own deaths to escape. Others changed names, crossed oceans. There are records of new immigrants arriving at Ellis Island who weren't who they claimed to be. Just 2 people trying to start over under borrowed names. You won't find them in the history books. You'll find them in the margins of census reports or on shared gravestones with mismatched birth dates. You're walking still, the sky now bruising with dusk. Your partner is beside you, quiet, focused, one hand brushing yours just enough to remind you you're not alone. Maybe you'll make it. Maybe you'll cross the border, find a sympathetic priest, get the words out before someone stops you. Or maybe the next village already has your names nailed to a post, but you walk anyway, because even if it ends in ruin, at least you chose it. At least for one night, you lived as if love was enough. And in a world that says it isn't, that alone makes you dangerous. There's a bitter taste in your mouth, not from fear, not from regret, but from the pinch of something sweet that went too far. You licked it off your finger, thinking it was a treat, a charm, a little help from someone who said they understood how you felt. Now your head is spinning, your chest feels tight, and the person you love is leaning in close, but they don't see your panic. They think it's passion. You think you might die. Because tonight, love came wrapped in magic, and maybe poison. Across centuries, when people couldn't get love through words, gold, or stolen glances, they turned to the fringe. Alchemy, spells, herbs, charms, and potions. If love wouldn't come freely, maybe it could be conjured, or forced, or trapped in a vial sealed with wax and desperation. Sometimes it worked. More often, it didn't. But even the attempt could get you ruined, or buried. Let's rewind to Renaissance Italy, where powdered charms and whispered incantations were sold in market stalls under the table, right next to fruit and fish. You might find a sprig of verbena for attraction, or a powdered root to draw the gaze of your beloved. Mix it into a cake, slip it into wine, or burn it in the corner of their room and whisper their name 3 times into a mirror. You weren't just falling in love, you were casting a net. And if it worked, who's to say it wasn't fate? But love and magic are a volatile combination, especially when both are misunderstood. And the more society tried to clamp down on passion, the more people tried to manipulate it with whatever they could get their hands on. Moss scraped from tombs, oils from dangerous flowers, snake's blood disguised as ink. Some of these ingredients caused mild hallucinations. Others caused vomiting, seizures, or death. Love potions, in many cases, were just slow-moving poisons with a nice label. Take the infamous case of Julia Tofana in the 17th century Rome. She sold a concoction called Aqua Tofana, which was advertised as a beauty product, but was actually a tasteless poison used by women to murder abusive husbands. Her potion gave them power. It also gave them suspicion. Eventually she was arrested and executed, but not before allegedly helping hundreds of women. Some historians argue that her poison was also used in failed love charms, given to a beloved in small doses to make them weak, vulnerable, in need of care. But love, of course, isn't guaranteed to survive arsenic. Elsewhere, charms were sewn into clothing, hidden under mattresses, or fed in tiny doses over time. In the Caribbean, Ubea and other folk traditions were used not just for protection, but to bind lovers. Hair, nails, blood. All personal items considered powerful ingredients. A woman might bury a charm beneath a lover's doorstep to keep him faithful. A man might wear a piece of cloth anointed with oils to draw affection. Did it work? Maybe. Maybe just enough. Or maybe it only worked until someone found the charm, burned it, and burned you along with it. In West Africa and parts of South America, love rituals often included songs, dances, and the blessing or cursing of ancestors. But when colonizers arrived, they labelled these traditions as devil's work, banning them, persecuting practitioners, and turning once sacred rites into grounds for execution. A woman who used to be a healer suddenly became a witch. Her potions became evidence. Her lovers, when questioned, often claimed they were bewitched to save themselves. There's a fringe case from the 18th century Poland where a nobleman accused his lover of enchanting him after she broke off their affair. He said he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and dreamed of her nightly. Her punishment? Public flogging, banishment, and the forced burning of all enchanted objects she had ever given him, which included a locket, a ribbon, and a handful of dried rose petals. Because nothing says justice like beating someone over a flower. But magic wasn't always aimed at others. Sometimes it was self-directed. People drank tonics to make themselves more attractive, rubbed oils on their skin to appear irresistible, or swallowed herbs to kill the part of themselves that dared to feel at all. In medieval monasteries, monks used dried willow bark, yes, the precursor to aspirin, to cool the passions of the flesh. In one diary, a monk wrote of drinking a bitter brew to purify his thoughts after dreaming of a woman's voice. Not her body, just her voice. And then there's the case of cursed rings, gifts exchanged between lovers, sometimes blessed, sometimes hexed, always loaded. In some folk tales, a ring given by a scorned lover would cause sickness, infertility, or madness. In others, it bound 2 people forever. One 15th century tale tells of a woman who gave her lover a silver ring inscribed with a charm. When he tried to remove it after breaking things off, he fell ill. When he tried to return it, His hand went numb. He eventually begged her to take him back. The moment she did, he recovered. Coincidence? Folktale? Maybe. But the ring is on display in a museum, and it still makes people uneasy. Scholars still debate how much belief in love magic actually shaped relationships. Were these rituals genuine acts of devotion? Were they attempts to control the uncontrollable? Or were they simply last resorts in a world where saying "I want you" could cost your life, your land, or your soul? You're sitting by a fire now, holding something warm in your hands, a cup of tea or wine or something else entirely. You wonder what's in it. Honey? Cinnamon? A little something extra. You were told it would open the heart, soften the will, sweeten the tongue. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's just warm. But your breath is slowing, your skin glowing, and the person across from you is watching you a little too carefully. You want to believe it's real, that this moment means something. But in a world where love has been ground into powder, slipped into drinks, and stitched into secrets, how can you be sure? Because sometimes love is a spell, and sometimes it's a trap. The scent is divine, something floral, something sweet, with just a faint trace of something sharp beneath it. You dab it on your neck, your wrists, your collarbone, as if preparing for war instead of a date. And maybe you are, because in this century, in this palace, in this bedroom with velvet drapes and mirrors polished to a shine, love has a scent, and sometimes it's laced with death. Tonight we're stepping into the world of beauty, cosmetics, and secret weaponry, when perfume wasn't just a luxury, but a cover for poison, and when loving the wrong person could get you kissed, then killed. Literally. Across history, especially among the aristocracy, seduction and death lived side by side. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the rituals of beauty. Lotions, powders, lip stains, scented gloves. But beneath the rose oil and beeswax, mercury, lead, belladonna, nightshade, and in more than a few cases, arsenic. Let's start with Renaissance Italy, where love was layered on thick. A noblewoman's toilette took hours. Her cheeks were dusted with white lead, her lips stained with cinnabar. The more porcelain your skin, the higher your status. But the real power was in her perfume. Many noblewomen, and yes, some men, carried scent pomanders not just to ward off bad air, but to mask the smell of poison. A kiss on the neck might be a prelude to passion, or a slow, burning death. One famous case centres around the Medici family, that glittering dynasty of Florentine power and operatic drama. Catherine de' Medici, sent off to France to become queen, brought with her a personal perfumer, a man named René, who reportedly crafted scents laced with toxins for her more delicate political needs. Rival nobles who crossed her were said to have died with the smell of jasmine still clinging to their clothes. No proof, of course, but the rumours were strong enough to make people hold their breath when she entered a room. And speaking of Catherine, her beauty routine would make any dermatologist faint. Face creams made with mercury, eye drops of belladonna to dilate the pupils, making her look wide-eyed and innocent, but slowly robbing her of her sight. Even her gloves were rumoured to be soaked in a special mixture of musk and, allegedly, poison. A handshake from the wrong queen could ruin your entire week. Then there's the infamous Lucrezia Borgia, often painted by history as the femme fatale of the 15th century, though modern scholars argue she was more pawn than player. Still, stories of her poison rings, her golden hair laced with deadly oils, and her seemingly endless string of dead husbands help cement the idea that a beautiful woman in love might also be carrying something lethal behind her smile. But it wasn't just women. Men too weaponized their grooming. In the Ottoman court, perfumes were used not only for seduction, but as tests of loyalty. If a gift of cologne came from the wrong person, you might hesitate before wearing it, because while one drop might attract a lover, another might drop you into your grave. One sultan reportedly used poisoned incense sticks to rid himself of an ambitious rival. The man fell unconscious during prayer. Everyone said it was divine punishment. Everyone knew it was politics. There's a fringe case from the 18th century Russia, where a young nobleman attempted to assassinate a rival suitor, using poisoned beard wax. He'd learned that the man applied it daily before dinner, so he bribed the servant who trimmed the moustache. The target survived, just barely. The attacker was exiled to Siberia, and the woman they both loved, she entered a convent. Romantic, right? Even outside of court, love and death mingled in the cosmetics bag, In Victorian England, arsenic wafers were sold to women who wanted that pale, translucent look. They were advertised as beauty enhancers. They also slowly destroyed your liver. And then there was toilet vinegar, a mix of herbs and acids used to tone the skin and perfume the body. Except when someone added a drop of prussic acid. Then it toned nothing. It just ended things. And let's not forget about scented letters, an absolute staple of romantic communication from the 16th century onward. Lovers would scent their notes with perfume to leave a lingering trace of themselves. Sweet, until someone soaked the paper in something toxic. There's a recorded case from Portugal in 1624 where a woman died after receiving a love letter laced with powdered aconite. She read it. She pressed it to her chest. She coughed once. That was it. Historians debate how widespread these perfumed poisonings really were. Were they frequent? Rare? Overhyped by gossip and legend? Probably all of the above. What's not debated is that cosmetics were dangerous, and not just because of poison. The mere act of wearing makeup in certain societies labelled you a temptress, a schemer. A woman who painted her face was seen as hiding something. A man who wore fragrance too boldly might be accused of moral weakness. To present yourself as desirable was to step into a minefield. To be seen as seductive was to invite suspicion. And still, people did it. They painted their lips, sprinkled their lace with ambergris, dabbed oil behind their ears. They went out knowing that the very tools they used to attract love might one day be the cause of their downfall. You're standing in front of a mirror now, applying something sweet to your skin. Behind you, your lover waits. Maybe they brought the perfume. Maybe you did. Maybe it's safe. Maybe it isn't. But you smile anyway. Because for one night you want to be beautiful, desired, remembered, even if it cost everything. Because in this time, in this place, love doesn't just bloom in candlelight. It burns. Slowly. Silently. With the scent of roses and regret. The walls are damp with moss, and your breath fogs the air as you descend the spiral staircase, each footstep echoing like a secret. You're not supposed to be here. No one is. Above you, life continues. Banquets, court hearings, prayers. But down here is where they keep the ones who are too much. Too in love, too dangerous, too inconvenient to let live free. And tonight, you're visiting someone who once made the mistake of loving too loudly. Welcome to the tower, the dungeon, the cell, the padded room in the attic, wherever society has tucked away those it didn't want to kill outright, but couldn't allow to keep loving either. For as long as people have been falling in love, others have been deciding what kinds of love are acceptable. And when love crosses the wrong line, too scandalous, too obsessive, too defiant, society often chooses confinement over execution. You don't have to be dead, just silenced, disappeared, forgotten. Let's talk about Juana of Castile, forever known as Juana la Loca, Juana the Mad. The daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, Juana fell so deeply in love with her husband, Philip the Handsome, that when he died, she reportedly carried his corpse from city to city, refusing to bury it. Was it grief, madness, or just unbearable, bottomless love? History labelled her insane. She spent the next 46 years locked away in a convent, allowed no contact with the outside world. Her love was too intense, too embarrassing, too unmanageable. So they caged her. And then there's the case of Lady Arbella Stuart, a noblewoman with a blood claim to the English throne. She married without royal permission, an act of treason when you're a potential heir. Her husband was locked in the Tower of London. She was imprisoned separately. They attempted to escape together, like something out of a tragic ballad. They failed. He made it to the continent. She was captured, died in the tower, most likely of starvation. Her crime, love without permission. In many of these cases, madness and love blur into one another in the historical record. A woman becomes unbalanced after falling for the wrong man. A man descends into lunacy after being spurned. Families declare them unstable and institutionalize them, sometimes for life. It's neat, it's tidy, and it means no one has to explain why that person kept writing letters, kept waiting by windows, kept singing that same song over and over again. In 19th century asylums, the list of diagnoses that could land you in a padded room included erotomania, nymphomania, and excessive romantic preoccupation. Translation: too many feelings, too many poems, too much longing. And while yes, some people did suffer from obsessive behaviour, many others were simply inconvenient. Wives who didn't forget past lovers, men who wouldn't move on, people whose grief lingered too long. One chilling fringe case from colonial America involved a woman institutionalised after her fiancé died of smallpox. She refused to remove her wedding dress. She kept his pillow. She sang to the air where he used to sleep. Her family committed her, citing disruptive mourning. Her dress was never returned. The asylum burned down decades later, and her name was lost in the records. But her story appears in the footnotes of town history as the ghost bride in the attic. The thing is, confinement didn't always look like an iron door. Sometimes it came dressed as concern. A room in the back of the house, a locked diary, a life of supervised walks and scheduled visits. In Victorian England, women were often prescribed rest cures for romantic distress. This meant weeks of isolation. No reading, no talking, no movement. Imagine being punished for heartbreak with bed rest and silence, while men who'd caused it went on with their lives. And for men, the story wasn't much better. Poets, composers and painters who fixated too deeply on a muse were often ridiculed, institutionalised, or simply discarded. The composer Robert Schumann, tormented by unrequited feelings and deteriorating mental health, was placed in an asylum where he died alone. His beloved Clara wasn't allowed to see him for the last 2 years of his life. Why? Because it was for his own good. Historians still argue about how many of these cases were genuinely psychiatric and how many were social suppression dressed up in medical terms. But whether the cell was made of stone or stigma, the result was the same. Love that refused to die was locked away, where no one had to see it unravel. Sometimes the confined were lovers of the wrong person. Other times they were the wrong kind of person. LGBTQ+ individuals were frequently imprisoned under laws that criminalised both their identities and their affections. In England, gross indecency could get you 2 years of hard labour. In the early 20th century, perversion was often treated with electroshock, ice baths and worse. Love, once again, labelled as illness. There's a particularly brutal case in early 1900s Germany, where 2 men were discovered exchanging love letters. They were both university professors. One was dismissed quietly. The other was committed to a psychiatric hospital for rehabilitation. He was never released. The letters were burned. Except one. It surfaced years later in a family trunk folded neatly, ending with, "Even locked in darkness, I will always turn toward your voice." You're back in the tower now, or maybe it's a hospital. Or maybe it's just a memory of a place someone once whispered about. Someone is sitting on the stone bench beside the window, fingers tracing the frame like it might turn into a doorway. They're humming, waiting, writing, dreaming of someone they're no longer allowed to name. And maybe they're you. Because in this world, if your love scares the wrong people, or refuses to die on schedule, they'll try to contain it. Not because it's evil, but because it's powerful. You've never felt so cold, not even in the dead of winter. Not the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, but the kind that settles in your chest and refuses to thaw. You're standing in front of a court, or maybe a judge, or maybe just your community, who now feels less like neighbours and more like a jury. You've done something unforgivable, not because it was cruel or violent or unjust, but because you loved the wrong person, and now you're on trial, not metaphorically, not in the poetic sense, literally. For centuries, people have stood in courtrooms and on scaffolded platforms, answering for love like it was a crime, because in many places it was. Tonight you're in the company of the accused. Let's start with adultery. For much of history, marriage wasn't about companionship. It was a contract, a transfer of property, a merging of bloodlines. So stepping outside that contract wasn't just personal betrayal, it was economic sabotage, and it was prosecuted accordingly. In ancient Mesopotamia, under the Code of Hammurabi, a woman caught in adultery could be drowned in a river. In ancient Greece, a man who seduced another man's wife could be legally killed on the spot. No trial, no questions. Flash forward to Puritan New England. You're standing in the stocks, your hands locked in wood, a scarlet A stitched to your chest. Not because you murdered someone, but because you had a child with the wrong man. Your neighbours spit near your feet. Your husband is nowhere. And the person you loved, condemned, hanged, or simply disappeared. The real-world version of this wasn't just the scarlet letter. It was hundreds of public punishments, exile orders, floggings, and imprisonments. In Massachusetts in the 1600s, both men and women could be whipped for fornication. Records describe people stripped to the waist and given 20 lashes for premarital relations. In one case, a couple was fined, publicly shamed, and then forced to marry, because nothing says romance like mandatory matrimony under duress, and it didn't stop there. In England, criminal conversation was a tort, a kind of civil lawsuit where a husband could sue the man who'd slept with his wife. Not the wife herself, just her lover. Why? Because she was considered the husband's property. If you damaged her, emotionally or physically, you owed him compensation. One man in 1779 sued for £10,000, an outrageous sum at the time, after discovering his wife's affair. He won. She had no say in the matter. She lost her home, her name, everything. Meanwhile, same-sex love wasn't just taboo, it was punishable by death. In England, buggery laws stayed on the books from the 1500s well into the 1800s. In 1835, James Pratt and John Smith were the last two men in Britain executed for homosexuality. Their crime, being caught in a private room, nothing violent, nothing public, just intimacy that the law decided shouldn't exist. Their names are now engraved at a memorial, but back then, they were just two more bodies hung for love. One particularly haunting fringe case comes from the 17th century Germany, where a widow was accused of sorcery by seduction after remarrying a much younger man. She was too persuasive, too beautiful, too alive. Her town claimed she must have bewitched him. She was put on trial for witchcraft, tortured, eventually confessed to nothing true, just what they wanted to hear. She was burned. Her husband was forced to testify against her, weeping in court. He later drowned himself. Not a fairy tale. Just one more way love turned deadly under oath. Even royalty wasn't safe. Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII, was charged with adultery, incest and conspiracy. Whether or not she was guilty is still debated. What isn't debated is that her love for Henry once lifted her to a throne and then cost her her head. Her lovers, real or imagined, were executed too. Love, in that court, was a tightrope with no safety net. And let's not forget breach of promise lawsuits. In the 1800s and early 1900s, if a man proposed and then changed his mind, a woman could sue him for damages, because being left unmarried, especially after intimacy, was seen as a social death sentence. One woman in New York sued for $100,000 after her fiancé jilted her. She won half. He claimed she was too emotional. She claimed he was a coward. The court agreed with her. These trials weren't just legal proceedings, they were performances, spectacles, a public reminder of what happened when you loved outside the rules. The courtroom became the confessional. The punishment was not just a fine or a sentence, it was humiliation, loss, and the kind of shame that could stretch generations. Even now, echoes of this persist. In some countries, adultery is still criminalized. Same-sex relationships are still punished by prison, or worse. In 2020, a woman in Sudan was sentenced to death for marrying outside her faith. In other places, morality police patrol behaviour, punishing couples for holding hands, kissing or existing together without the right paperwork. The courtrooms are quieter now, but the judgment never really left. You're sitting on a bench now, heart pounding, waiting for the verdict. You loved someone. That's the charge. You held them too closely, too publicly, too fiercely. And now the people in charge are deciding if your love was acceptable. Maybe they fine you, maybe they brand you, maybe they exile you, but maybe they don't. Maybe you stand up, walk out, refuse to apologize. Because love, real love, has never sat quietly in a courtroom. It's always been the defendant, never the judge. The crowd is louder than you expected. Faces pressed close, mouths open in delight, awe or judgment. It's hard to tell which. Music pulses from hidden corners, laughter bursts like fireworks, and the scent of sweat, spice and perfume swirls thick in the air. You're wearing something dazzling, or absurd, or nothing at all, depending on how far back in history we're going tonight. But one thing is clear, in this moment, in this place, love has slipped off its leash. For once, it isn't shameful, it isn't criminal, it's allowed, maybe even celebrated, but only for a night. You've walked into the world of carnivals, masquerades and festivals of reversal, where the rules are temporarily tossed into the fire and forbidden love gets a fleeting chance to breathe. Let's start with the Roman Saturnalia, an ancient festival held each December. For a few wild days, slaves were allowed to swap places with their masters. Men dressed as women, women dressed as gods, and forbidden desires got to strut in the open air. You could flirt with your betters, sleep with someone taboo, confess love behind a mask. As long as you returned to your role when the sun came up, you were safe. Mostly. That idea, love in disguise, became a blueprint for centuries of ritual rebellion. In medieval Europe, the Feast of Fools gave low-ranking clergy permission to mock authority. They'd wear garish costumes, crown a mock bishop, and sometimes, very quietly, use the chaos to meet a lover behind the sacristy. These weren't just parties, they were pressure valves. One day a year you could be wild, be dangerous, be honest, without being burned for it. And then came the masquerade balls of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. Velvet masks, gilded anonymity. You could dance with someone whose face you didn't see, and whose name you didn't need to know. Married women flirted with strangers. Men stole kisses from rivals. Gender became flexible. Status was suspended. The rules didn't just bend. They crumbled like sugar in your hand. In Venice, the carnival became legendary for exactly this. Masks weren't just for fun, they were armour. Behind a botto or moretta, you could cross every social line that normally caged you in. Courtesans danced with nobility. Servants whispered to poets. Same-sex couples found corners to hold hands. The mask said, "This isn't real." But for the people who waited all year for those few nights of freedom, it absolutely was. One famous case tells of a nobleman who fell in love with a masked dancer during Carnival. For 3 nights, they met in secret, never exchanging real names. On the final night, she revealed her face and her identity. She was his political rival's daughter. A union was impossible. They parted at dawn. Years later, they met again at court, married to other people. He looked at her. She looked away. That was all. But their letters, discovered centuries later, hinted that neither of them ever forgot those nights behind the masks. But these festivals weren't always safe havens. The danger didn't disappear, it just got delayed. In 18th century France, a woman who disguised herself as a man to dance freely with another woman at a masquerade was arrested once the mask came off. Her partner wasn't charged, just scolded, but the woman in disguise was tried for impersonation and moral corruption. Her punishment? Public shaming and exile. The message was clear: enjoy your night, but know your place when it's over. There's a fringe case from colonial Brazil where a group of enslaved people used carnival to organise a secret wedding between 2 lovers forbidden to marry by their masters. They performed the ceremony in costume, pretending it was a skit. The audience laughed. The lovers whispered real vows. When they were found out days later, the couple was separated and sold to different plantations. The story lived on in folk tales, where they're said to return each year as ghostly dancers, still seeking each other through the crowds. Even in more modern times, this pattern continues. Think of pride parades in the mid-20th century. Not the glittering global events of today, but the early defiant marches. People wore masks not just for fun, but for safety. To kiss someone in public. To hold a hand without being fired. The festival gave cover to a kind of love still considered illegal in many places. Even now, in certain countries, pride celebrations are banned, raided or restricted, because a celebration of love is somehow still seen as a threat. Masquerade culture offered an elegant workaround. Don't change the system, just step out of it for a night. It's tempting, liberating, but also exhausting, because when dawn comes, the masks come off, and the same rules click back into place like iron shackles. And yet, people kept dancing, because even a temporary escape was better than none. You're twirling now, caught up in the music. You don't know this person's name. Maybe you do. Maybe it's someone you've loved in secret for years, and tonight is the only time you're allowed to touch them without fear. The air is thick with laughter, but under it, hope, desperation, a collective agreement. For a few hours, love is not a crime. You know what will happen next. The music will end, the candles will gutter out, someone will sweep up the petals and the spilled wine, you'll return to your role, your silence, your mask of another kind. But for now, you're still dancing. Because even if the world only lets love live after dark and in disguise, people will keep carving out that space, over and over, year after year. And in those hours when the music plays loud enough to drown out judgment, love gets to be what it always wanted to be. Unhidden, unapologetic, alive. You smell the smoke before you see the flames. The scent isn't clean or crisp, it's thick, acrid, the kind that clings to skin and memory. There's shouting in the streets, but you can't quite make out the words. It's all blending into a roar, a tide, a storm without mercy. People are tearing down statues, soldiers are switching sides. Somewhere nearby a flag is burning, and in your pocket is a letter, a goodbye, a promise, a warning. You were in love yesterday, but today, love is a liability, because revolutions don't leave room for romance. You found yourself in one of history's sharpest contradictions. When the world tries to change everything all at once, love usually ends up caught in the crossfire. Let's start with the French Revolution, a masterclass in how quickly passion turns political. One day you're dancing at Versailles, flirting behind fans, passing notes with wax seals. The next you're ducking guillotines, watching your former lovers denounce you from the witness stand. Marriage wasn't safe, courtship wasn't safe, nothing was. Even love letters became evidence. Aristocrats who once whispered sweet things in ink were hauled into tribunals where their correspondence was read aloud like confessions. She called him her lion of justice, one prosecutor mocked, then let him roar in prison. Take the tragic case of Lucille Desmoulins and her husband, Camille, a journalist and revolutionary. They married young, defied the odds, and wrote love letters so tender they could melt a guillotine's blade. But when Camille criticised Robespierre during the Reign of Terror, he was executed. Days later, Lucille was arrested for mourning him too publicly. Her crime, loving a traitor. She followed him to the scaffold, still in her wedding gown. In revolutionary Russia, the story repeated itself. The Bolsheviks may have promised equality, but they didn't exactly support romantic idealism. Marriages were torn apart by ideology. Lovers found themselves on opposite sides of the revolution. Some couples joined the cause together, only for one to be purged later. To love someone who questioned the party was to put your own life on the line. A fringe case from 1930s Moscow tells of a poet and a factory worker who fell in love across class lines. She wrote verses praising the proletariat. He brought her flowers wrapped in propaganda. But when he was accused of harbouring anti-Soviet views, she was forced to publicly denounce him. "I love the revolution more," she wrote, "but my hands still remember him." She was spared. He wasn't. Revolutions are full of declarations, liberty, justice, equality, but rarely intimacy. Love becomes suspicious, a distraction, an indulgence from the old world. Even in America's own revolution you see this tension. Loyalist and patriot couples were forced to choose between love and loyalty. One famous pair, Peggy Shippen and Benedict Arnold, played both sides. She was accused of influencing his betrayal. History remembers her more as a seductress than a strategist, because apparently it's easier to believe a woman ruined a general than a man ruined himself. And what about the uprisings no one likes to mention? Enslaved people revolting in Haiti, colonized nations rising up in Africa and Asia. Love stories from those revolutions are harder to find. Not because they didn't exist, but because the victors didn't preserve them. What we do know is this. People loved in secret, in danger, in exile. They passed messages through laundry lines, carved names into trees, whispered vows in the chaos, and sometimes they died for it. During the Haitian Revolution, one woman, an enslaved midwife named Marie, was caught hiding a wounded rebel in her home. He was her lover. She refused to give him up. She was tortured. She never spoke. The man escaped. She died nameless in the records. But in oral histories, she became a symbol of loyalty so fierce it outlived the country's old chains. Even cultural revolutions brought danger. In Maoist China, romantic love was seen as bourgeois weakness. People were encouraged to marry for ideology, not affection. Couples were split up and re-educated. Love letters were burned. Crying over a lost partner could be interpreted as counter-revolutionary behaviour. Think about that. Grief itself was suspect. In one chilling case, a young man confessed to loving a woman who'd been labelled a class enemy. He was asked to denounce her publicly. He refused. His family disowned him. He was sent to a labour camp. She died during forced relocation. Years later, his testimony resurfaced in an underground memoir where he wrote, "I loved her in a time that did not allow love. I buried her with my silence." Historians debate whether revolutions kill romance, or just force it to go underground. Maybe it doesn't die. Maybe it adapts. But even then, it's bruised, scarred, rewritten by necessity. You don't say, "I love you." You say, "We stand together." You don't dream of weddings. You dream of survival. And even after the revolutions end, after the statues fall and the slogans fade, love doesn't always come back the same. Some people return home to lovers who don't recognise them anymore. Some carry the memory of a romance that died in the trenches. Others try to rebuild what they once had, only to find the pieces don't quite fit. You're sitting on a crate now, tucked behind a barricade, clutching a photo in your hand. Maybe it's crumpled, maybe it's forbidden, but it's all you have left. Your lover is gone, or missing, or watching from another rooftop, weapon in hand. You don't know if you'll survive this week, let alone this uprising. But you remember the last thing they said, "Find me when it's over." That's the cruel trick of revolution. It promises a better world, but never guarantees who'll be left to love in it. And you'll keep the photo close, just in case. The wind is sharp at the edge of the cliff. Your feet slide slightly on the wet grass, slick with evening dew, or maybe just the last tears you'll allow yourself. Beside you is the person you love, or what's left of them, their hand in yours, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from certainty. Below you the sea churns, or maybe it's rocks, jagged and waiting, or just darkness, endless, soundless darkness. Because tonight, there's no wedding, no escape, no duel, no last-minute pardon. There's only this, a leap. Welcome to the end of the line, the final escape hatch lovers have reached for throughout history when the world gave them no other option. The lover's leap, part legend, part truth, always tragic. Across cultures and centuries, cliffs, towers and bridges have carried the weight of impossible love. And when running wasn't enough, when eloping failed, when disguises didn't work, when forgiveness was never coming, some couples made the ultimate decision to leave together, not into the world, but out of it. One of the most enduring tales comes from 14th century Greece, where a priest's daughter and a fisherman fell in love. She was promised to another. He was too poor, too common. They met in secret, planned an escape but were discovered, beaten, separated, locked away. On the night she was to be married off, they escaped again, only to be caught on a cliff above the sea. Rather than be taken, they held hands and jumped. The cliff is still known as Vima Ton Eraston, the Lover's Step. You'll find stories like this all over the world. In Jamaica, there's a cliff called Lover's Leap where two enslaved people, bound to different masters, leapt to their deaths rather than be separated. Their story, passed down in oral tradition, is part tragedy, part resistance. Because even in bondage, their love refused to be dictated. The legend says they still rise from the sea as birds at dusk. In China, the butterfly lovers, Liang Shanbo and Zhu Yingtai, are immortalized in a tale that's been called the Chinese Romeo and Juliet. She dressed as a man to attend school. He fell in love with her, not knowing her secret. When he found out, it was too late. She was promised to another. He died of heartbreak. She, on the way to her unwanted wedding, visited his grave and threw herself into it. The earth opened. They were buried together. Butterflies rose from the soil. One fringe but hauntingly real account comes from 19th century Wales. Two young women, farm girls, fell in love, lived together for years, calling themselves companions. When one was arranged to be married to a cousin, they walked to the cliff where they used to picnic. Only one body was found. The other was never recovered. Locals whispered that she turned into a gull circling the shore, waiting for the tides to return her love. And of course, there's the story you already know, the balcony one, Romeo and Juliet. A fictional tale, sure, but one echoing so many real tragedies. Two young people in love, crushed beneath the weight of family, society and miscommunication. The romance ends not with a wedding, but with two dead teenagers, and a note that arrives a little too late. So many of these stories come with a moral. Don't fall in love with the wrong person. Obey your elders. Respect the rules. But that's not really what they're about, is it? They're about what happens when people are given no way to love without punishment. When every door is locked, every path blocked. When love becomes a crime and death starts to feel like the only honest option. Historians debate the validity of these stories. Did they really happen? Were they embellished? Probably. Definitely. But does it matter? The fact that so many cultures independently develop the same story, a doomed couple, a final jump, tells us what we need to know. That across time, love has often had to defy the very world that created it. You're still at the edge of the cliff. The wind is stronger now. Your hand tightens around theirs. You could run again, try another disguise, plead for mercy. But you've already tried all that. What they want isn't for you to live. It's for you to give up this love, and that's not happening. So maybe this is a protest, a final act of defiance. Maybe this is your wedding in a way. No vows, just silence, no guests, just stars, no ring. Just the pressure of two hands gripped tight, refusing to let go. You close your eyes. You don't need to look. Because the leap isn't about what waits at the bottom. It's about everything you leave behind when you jump. The noise finally fades. No crowds, no courts, no soldiers, no footsteps coming down the hall to take something from you. Just quiet, soft, wide, forgiving, quiet. You're not standing on a cliff anymore. You're not hiding in an alley or gripping a letter like it might explode. You're lying back somewhere safe, letting the weight of centuries settle and then slowly lift.
And when you look back at everything you've walked through tonight, something becomes clear. Love wasn't dangerous because people didn't understand it. Love was dangerous because people understood it too well. They knew it could make you disobey kings, cross borders, break laws written in blood and stone. They knew it could make a peasant walk miles every week just to see his wife. Make a queen defy an empire. Make someone choose exile, prison, silence, or even death rather than let go. War kills bodies, love threatens systems. That's why it was policed, ritualized, punished, wrapped in contracts, vows, borders, and blades. Because uncontrolled love doesn't just change two people, it destabilizes everything built on fear, obedience, and inheritance. And yet, it never stopped. Not in plagues, not in prisons, not in cloisters, colonies, courts, or revolutions. Love kept leaking through cracks, in letters burned too late, in hands held after dark, in names carved into wood, stone, skin, in children who shouldn't have existed but did anyway. Most of the people in these stories didn't win. There was no triumphant ending, no swelling music. But they left something behind, proof that even when love was punished, it was never meaningless. And here you are now, centuries later, able to love openly in ways that once would have gotten you exiled, executed, or erased. Not because the danger is gone, but because so many people took it on before you. So as you rest now, let the story soften. Let the sharp edges blur. You don't need to carry their fear anymore, just their courage, their stubbornness, their refusal to let love be small. The past can finally go quiet. The night can finally hold you.